So welcome to the viewer brew streams. So this is coming right after we finished the Pauper Marathon, and so I made this post. Now that the format streams are coming to an end, meaning the Legacy, Modern, Pauper, Pioneer Marathons, I'd like to do something with viewer brews, play them on Moto, or deck tech them. So I asked if anyone would like to get their deck teched or played on a Moto stream. To link it, it had to be for either Legacy, Modern, Pauper, or Pioneer, and I also would accept Commander decks, but I wasn't going to play them on stream. And I did ask that if you provided a Commander deck to specify whether you intend it to be a CEDH deck or a regular Commander deck. So I have not looked at any of these decks ahead of time. I have just opened the links to them to make sure that the deck is viewable, but other than that, I'm going in blind to the decks. So our first deck comes from HFitch3, and this is Pili-Pala Combo, and they have a description of the deck. So the Pili-Pala Infinite Mana Combo by yours truly and my friend Harry. Combo revolves around getting Pili-Pala out in either Grand Architect or Careful Cultivation. So for anyone unfamiliar with these, I'll let you know what they do. So Pili-Pala is a 2-mana 1/1 artifact creature with flying that says 2 mana untap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Grand Architect, 3 mana 1/3, various abilities. The main one that matters is the third one. Tap an untapped blue creature you control, add double colorless, spend only to cast artifacts, spells, or activate abilities of artifacts, but you can also use the second ability to turn an artifact creature into a blue creature. And Careful Cultivation is an aura from originally Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and it gives the enchanted creature tap, add double green. So if you've got Pili-Pala and Grand Architect, you can activate the second ability of Architect to make Pili-Pala into a blue creature, and then you can use Grand Architect's third ability to tap Pili-Pala for 2 colorless, then use the 2 colorless to activate Pili-Pala to untap it to make a mana of any color. So you net 1 mana per loop, you make infinite mana. Same thing with Careful Cultivation, you enchant Pili-Pala. Pili-Pala now taps for double green. You tap double green, then you use the double green to untap it with its own ability. You make infinite mana. So, to win with Grand Architect, and he explains it here, have Pili-Pala on the battlefield without Summoning Sickness, play Grand Architect, pay 1 to use its ability to turn Pili-Pala blue until end of turn, allowing it to tap itself for 2 colorless, create infinite mana with Pili-Pala, being able to activate its own mana ability, or winning with Careful Cultivation. Same thing I said earlier, it has to be on the field without Summoning Sickness, use Careful Cultivation to tap it for double green, untap it, make infinite mana. So, win cons. So now that you've got infinite mana, what do you do with it? Overall, the main goal is to find Karn and grab an infinite mana sink, usually Walking Ballista, but also Sands of Delirium for cases where damage can't work, or a Pithing Needle on Ballista exists. Wins can be achieved by cast Whispers of the Muse for its buyback cost, and draw your entire deck to find Karn the Great Creator if you don't already have it in your hand. 2. Animating, pumping, and attacking with a lethal Crawling Barrens or Lair of the Hydra. And lesser options, without infinite mana, hard cast Karn and win with Karn Shenanigans, Liquimetal Coating. Cast Seagate Restoration with your infinite mana to hopefully draw into and above win con. Then you've got the conclusion. So the rest of the deck comprises of cantrips and counterspells to protect the combo, which can be fired off at any time once infinite mana is achieved to secure a win when trying to resolve a Karn. This deck can win as easily as turn 3. However, do note that the deck is very weak to Stony Silence effects, and Pili-Pala is especially vulnerable to any 1 toughness pings. Don't leave him defenseless. The deck has no solid sideboard yet, but should probably run some Besajus and items of the sort to combat hate cards like Pithing Needle that could shut down the deck. And warning, this deck is jank as hell. There are rare situations where you can get the infinite combo and not have a payoff, causing some extremely silly moments. Please play only for fun. This is not some tier 1 meta-shattering ass blast of a deck. Well, thank you for the submission, HFitch. So I'm going to share my thoughts now. So, well, first let's go over the deck. So, Simic mana base with Fetch Lands, Island Forest, Breeding Pool, then 1 Layer of the Hydra and Crawling Barrens to make infinite, for these lands to be infinite mana outlets when you have the combo. Commune with the Gods can dig for Grand Architect, Pili-Pala, or Careful Consideration. Then there's Preordained, Serum Visions, Seagate Restoration as another land here, so 22 lands total. Force of Negation, Spell Pierce, Whispers of the Muse, and then the Careful, and then Karn. And then the sideboard, as they said, they don't have a definitive sideboard yet, so it's just like the usual Liquimetal, Ensnaring Bridge, Ballista, and then Sands of Delirium. So, a couple of things. Well, as far as the sideboard goes, you'd probably want some other Karn fetches in order to grab certain things when you don't have infinite mana with Karn, like various things that are usual suspects, like Pithing Needle, some form of graveyard hate like Tormod's Crypt or Relic of Progenitus, maybe Cityscape Leveler as a big bomb thing when you don't have infinite mana, but you do have a lot of mana. Otherwise, so I'm never really a fan of these infinite monosync lands, and the problem is that they don't actually kill the opponent if the opponent has a blocker or any removal spell. Although if they have a removal spell, they would just kill your combo beforehand. But assuming they don't, these don't get through blockers because they don't have any sort of form of evasion or trample. However, it is okay to have a few of them. So for example, devoted druid decks will play like a layer of the Hydra or two, but 5 is too many. And if you're going to play them in the first place, you need to be playing more of the green one and less of the colorless one. So I just wouldn't even play Crawling Barons at all, and I just play like 1 or 2 layer of the Hydras. You don't want a colorless land in the deck. Other problems are Force of Negation is not good. Force of Negation, unlike the Cascade decks, for example, is not able to actually protect your combo on your own turn. So Force of Negation is not actually helpful for anyone here. Then there's like Spell Pierce to protect the combo, and then Whispers of the Muse, and then the combo pieces. So first of all, I understand the thinking behind Whispers of the Muse, but it's just a bad card. Like, just don't have it. Just have regular cantrips that you can play normally when you don't have the infinite combo, and you should get there. Secondly, yeah, don't play Force of Negation. And I think, so when you have combo decks like this is basically just Devoted Druid in a different shell. That's essentially what it is. Turn 2 creature that has to pass the turn and then untap without summoning Sickness, and then follow up with another thing that goes off. So you don't want cards like Spell Pierce, because you don't want to, because you want to play Pili-Pala on turn 2 and then immediately have protection for it, and you can't pay for Spell Pierce with that. So what you actually want is cards like Giver of Runes. You want to go turn 1, Giver of Runes, or some other protection effect that you can use without paying mana for it. Turn 2 Pili-Pala, and then have protection up for Pili-Pala. So obviously Careful Cultivation is one of the cards here, but I think you could easily branch into 3 colors for white to play Giver of Runes, or just some other free effect. Now, the other big problem that the deck is going to have is you're playing a 1/1 artifact creature, so it dies to literally every single piece of removal in the format, including things like Force of Vigor and whatnot, which makes the combo extremely fragile. And then, yeah, it's just a very, very fragile combo deck, and as far as it goes, I feel like it's probably just straight up worse than Devoted Druid, because it's doing the same thing, but it's in different colors that you don't actually want. Like, Devoted Druid has the green spells that allow you to just tutor up any creature that you want. This doesn't have that. You have to play blue cantrips and just hope to find them, which means that if you don't find them, you're kind of out of luck. So, obviously, it is a combo deck that can win on turn 3, but I think it's just too fragile, especially in the current Modern environment. And this is going to be a common theme with a lot of the decks in these formats, but especially Modern. So if we bring up the Modern metagame, so the problem is that between Horizon sets, Fire Design, and Lord of the Rings now, and just like supplemental sets being added to these formats, the formats are just so incredibly powerful that the top decks push everything else out. And whereas a format like Modern used to be a brewer's paradise where you could play all sorts of weird jank and still win, now you really have to play one of the top 10 to 11 decks and everything else is pushed out. So if your deck isn't Scam, Omnath Pile, Rhinos, Yawgmoth, Murktide Amulet, Living End, Burn Hammer, and then I would say Tron and Coffers / Blue-Black Control and Creativity. If you're playing anything else besides these decks, you're already in a detrimental position, and you're already going down percentage points in terms of actually winning games if you're not running one of these top decks. It's not like it was before, where even the like quote-unquote tier 2 decks could make it. So interesting, but and Pili-Pala combo has existed for quite a while. It's a known quantity in the format, and I feel like if this combo was actually good, somebody would have figured out a workable deck by now. So as is, I think it has to be shelved. So then our second deck comes from Benny, and this is Mono Black Grief Scam. So this is the deck. Do they have a primer on it? They do not. I'm going to eat your face, bro. Cool primer. All right. So if I understand correctly, it's basically just Scam, but it doesn't have red cards in it. So we've got Grief, and then we got the Scam cards, Not Dead After All, Malakir Rebirth. Let's look at the rest of the deck. 1 Cling to Dust, Fatal Push, Scornblade Berserker, backup 1, sacrifice this creature, draw a card, Thoughtseize, Bitter Blossom, Dothy Voidwalker, Bowmasters, Sheoldred's Edict, Graveyard Trespasser, Baleful Mastery, and a Sheoldred. Then there is a suite of lands here, including green for apparently a sideboard Assassin's Trophy. Lockwayne, Hive of the Eye Tyrant, Fetches, Swamps, Nurturing Peatland. And then the sideboard has Damping Sphere, EE, Force of Despair, 1 Kozilek, which I presume is here to beat Mill, Leyline of the Void, Path of Peril. So right off the bat, I'm going to say this is just worse than regular Scam. Regular Scam has very, very good red cards that this deck is lacking. So Fury, Fable the Mirror Breaker, and Ragavan are the big ones. Having another scammable creature is a big part of the deck. Fable the Mirror Breaker is a huge part of getting rid of bad cards that you don't want. But even if I set aside regular Scam, I think this deck is playing a whole bunch of cards that aren't any good. So Malakir Rebirth, I think, is just worse than every other Scam effect. So I would just play Undying Evil in this spot. Cling to Dust is not a good card. Just don't play it. I see this all the time. It's just too inefficient for current day Modern. Scornblade Berserker, not sure why that's here. This card's bad. You need to be playing 4 Thoughtseizes. Bitter Blossom is not a playable Modern card anymore. And then Graveyard Trespasser is okay, but I don't know if it's good enough for Modern. And then Baleful Mastery. So the trick with Baleful Mastery is that you want cards that punish your opponent for drawing. So usually you pair this up with something like Narset so that the reduced cost draw effect doesn't actually work for the opponent. Now I understand that it technically works with Bowmasters, but it's still really bad to give your opponent a card with this. I also don't think that you need to be splashing green for Assassin's Trophy. First of all, I think Trophy's just not good. And then secondly, yeah, well, it's just not good. Like, there's no reason to be splashing green for this. You're better off just having a straight-up mono-black mono base. The rest of this is okay. Force of Despair is questionable, but it's otherwise fine. Oh, and obviously, so losing red means you don't get to play Blood Moon anymore, which is another big part of Scam. So you've got Damping Sphere in the sideboard here instead. The problem is, like, there's a bunch of problem cards, and it's just not as good as regular Rakdos Scam. But anyways, thank you for the submission, Benny. So then we've got something called Dreadshift by Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. This is a Pioneer deck, apparently, and they say in their comment, this is a brew I've been working on since Wilds came out. Sideboard is iffy only cause been mostly testing on Arena. So let's see. Let's see if we can piece together what this deck is doing. So it's an Abzan deck, Arboreal Grazer, Thoughtseize, Dryad of the Elysian Grove. So then there's no 2 mana plays. Then we jump up to 3. Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Eldritch Evolution, Scute Swarm, Wedding Announcement, Beseech the Mirror, Dread Presence. So the deck is called Dreadshift, so I'm going to assume that Dread Presence is relevant for this. Whenever a swamp enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. You draw a card and you lose 1 life. Or Dread Presence deals 2 damage to any target and you gain 2 life. Nissa of Shadowed Bows is a 4 mana planeswalker. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a loyalty counter on her. +1, untap target land you control. You may have it become a 3/3 elemental creature with haste and menace until end of turn. Or -5, you may put a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from your hand or graveyard with 2+1/+1 counters on it. Scapeshift, Vraskil Golgari Queen, Elishnorn Mother of Machines, and Wrenn and 7. Then lands are Blooming Marsh Boseiju, Forests, Godless Shrine Overgrown Tomb, Sunpetal Grove, Swamp Takanuma Urborg. So before we get to the sideboard, let's just go over the main deck. So if I understand correctly, the idea is you have a Dryad of the Elysian Grove in play and a Dread Presence in play, and then you cast Scapeshift. You eat all your lands, you put all of these lands in play, and because all of your lands are swamps with Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Dread Presence triggers on every single one of them entering, which causes your opponent to die. Or if you don't have Dryad, you can use Urborg to do the same thing. When you Scapeshift, you grab Urborg and a bunch of other lands and then kill your opponent that way. So let's see. And then Beseech the Mirror can find any piece that you're missing and Scapeshift. Okay, so how many lands need to hit the field for Dread Presence to kill your opponent? So assuming they're at 20, and that's probably a good assumption since this deck doesn't look like it's dealing any damage to the opponent prior to this. You need 10 lands to enter the battlefield for your opponent to die. Okay, so the first thing I would say is that I don't think you need to be splashing white in this deck. I don't think Wedding Announcement is doing much. I understand Elishnorn doubles the triggers on Dread Presence, but I think generally Elishnorn is way worse in Pioneer than it is in other formats, especially Modern. There just are not as many ETB trigger cards that like exist or are running around in Pioneer that are relevant. And you significantly worsen the deck by having to include white mana. So I think you can easily cut the Wedding Announcement and Elishnorns and just play straight green-black. Then the second thing is there's just a whole bunch of cards that I don't think have any purpose in this deck. So Arboreal Grazer sort of makes sense, but I feel like if you're going to be on 1 mana into 3 mana, you need to just be playing all 8 mana elves. You need to be playing the mana dorks. Thoughtseize, also not too relevant. Like, this deck just wants to ramp. You can bring in Thoughtseize post board if you need to interact with the opponent or take removal spells, but I don't think you main deck this. I think that you just need to be playing all the ramp possible so that you can immediately ramp into your bigger stuff. And then Scute Swarm, again, I think if your combo is going to be Dread Presence killing your opponent, then you really just want to be all in on that combo and not bothering with stuff like Scute Swarm, Vraska, Renin 7, like none of this stuff. Just be all in on the Scapeshift combo and then try to do other things post-board if it's relevant at that point. It's also probably just takes too long to set up, right? You need 10 lands to be in play for this to trigger over and over. Maybe you could trigger it like a few times before then, so you don't need all the way up to 10 lands, but then you're still talking about like 8 to 9 lands required to be in play, and the only ramp card in the deck is really Grazer and Dryad if you have multiple lands. This deck really needs more ways of putting lands into play faster, I think is the issue. And it's just got like all of these mid-range cards like Nissa, Vraska, Renin 7 that just are not doing much here. Also, how many things can you even sack to Beseech the Mirror, right? Like, you've got your 3 Scute Swarms and your 3 Wedding Announcements, and then that's basically it. You can technically sack Dryad because it's an enchantment, but you don't want to sack Dryad. So that is not enough fodder for Beseech the Mirror. So if you're going to run this, you need more fodder for Beseech the Mirror, and these cards are just not good. And you need probably just to be on 4 Scapeshifts. Like, just straight up just be on 4 Scapeshifts. Then the sideboard has Damping Sphere, Fatal Push, Raven Feeblement, Reckoner Bankbuster, Sholdred, Terra Sunder, Weathered Runestone. These look fine. And I guess Beseech the Mirror does get around Weathered Runestone because it technically exiles it first. Sideboard looks fine, but yeah, there's a lot of problems here. So cut the white cards, cut the bad cards that don't have to do with the combo, be more all in on the combo, play more ramp, play more cards that put lands into play. This deck probably needs to actually just be straight up playing cards like Cultivate just to make sure lands come into play. I also don't really think Eldritch Evolution works too well here. So Eldritch Evolution can only sack Grazer to get Dryad, and then you have to sack Dryad or Scute Swarm in order to get Dread Presence, and you don't want to sack either one of these if you have them. Yeah, a lot of reworking, but I think just the fundamental concept of this deck doesn't work because you need too many lands in play before this is able to go off. So even with, so Pioneer doesn't have cards like Rampant Growth, Sakura Tribuilder, etc. The first cards that you get in Pioneer that are putting lands from your library directly into play, I believe all cost 3 mana, which means that you're not actually playing any land-centric mana ramp until at least turn 3, and then not after that, and then after that, not so much either. So let's look at the cards in Pioneer that put lands directly into play from the library into the battlefield. So for lands from the library directly onto the battlefield, you're not getting any effects until you get to 3 mana, although, I mean, technically there's stuff like Thunderherd Migration, but you're not playing that. So you've got Cultivate is probably the best one on 3, or maybe like Grow from the Ashes, but at 3, you're only getting 1 land out, and then you need to get to more than that. Nissa's Pilgrimage can find multiple lands, but they have to specifically be forests, and they specifically have to be basic forests. So if you're playing this multicolor deck to begin with, sort of an issue, although maybe you could be all in on green if you have enough color fixing to just play Dread Presence regardless. And then 4 mana is where you start getting to putting double lands into play with cards like Circuitous Route, Explosive Vegetation, Migration Path, Vastwood Surge, that kind of stuff, right? So if you're going to reimagine this deck, you would probably need to play a bunch of mana ramp early, and then have 3 to 4 mana spells that put lands directly onto the battlefield, and then eventually you win via Dread Presence and Scapeshift, or yeah, basically Dread Presence and Scapeshift. But again, it's just too many lands, too slow. Dread Presence needs too much to go off to kill the opponent. Dryad doesn't do anything without Dread Presence in play. It's kind of a problem. Like, it's essentially trying to take the Valakut strategies of Modern and transplant them into Pioneer, but it just doesn't really work. This deck really wants Field of the Dead, unfortunately. Yeah, it wants a land that will trigger when you just have Scapeshift and nothing else, or when you just have Dryad Elysian Growth and Scapeshift, without a Valakut, without a Field of the Dead, without some kind of land that triggers by itself when you put it out. Having to rely on Dread Presence is an issue. But I like the idea. So this is one of those ideas where you go, it doesn't come together at the moment, but put it on the, the back shelf in your mind and just keep it in mind for maybe something in the future can make this work. And anyways, thanks to Fresh Prince of Bel-Air for submitting this deck. So then we've got Ensoul and Friends by AbstractMarcher. So in their comment, AbstractMarcher says, "Thank you for the opportunity for viewer submissions. This is going to be fun to see what gets played. Here's my Ensoul Artifact Affinity Brew Feel free to make adjustments as you see fit for the meta. So, let's see. They've got Memnite, Ornithopter, Darksteel Relic. Oh, and this is a modern deck. Okay, so Memnite, Ornithopter, Darksteel Relic, Shadow Spear, Springleaf Drum, Cranial Plating, Ensoul Artifact, Rise and Shine, which is basically Ensoul Artifact, but only a 4/4 instead of a 5/5, basically. Vault Scourge, Frogmite, Sojourner's Companion, Thought Monitor, Thoughtcast, and then a bunch of artifact lands. Okay, so, and then sideboard, Monolith, Metallic Rebuke, 4 Pithing Needles, not really sure why so many of those. Rip, Spellskite, Welding Jar. All right, okay, so 2 issues. First, it's just worse than regular Affinity, unfortunately. Like, going all in on stuff is a problem. There's more exile-based artifact removal than there is usually because people need to hit cards like Cauldron and the Ring, which are indestructible. So the fact that you have indestructible lands isn't as big of a plus as you'd normally get. Then there's the fact that I just think cards like Ensoul Artifact are just not modern power level anymore. Like, you just have a 5/5 Ornithopter is fine, but it's just not good enough anymore. Darksteel Relic is not playable. Yes, I understand you're an Affinity deck and you want 0 mana artifacts, but you can't play 0 mana artifacts that do literally nothing. And Memnite plus Ornithopter is already 8 0 drops anyway. Rise and Shine also just straight up isn't good, regardless. And then another big problem is no Urza's Saga. And all of these lands entering tapped, you might be able to get away with some tapped lands, but 12 is way too many. Way too many. And then I don't know what's really going on with the sideboard here. Like, why quadruple Pithing Needle? I don't really get that. I'm pretty sure it's worth it to play the 4 Metallic Rebukes before you play literally any other counter spell. And the rest of it is fine. Although, again, I think if you're gonna play Graveyard Hate, it should just be artifact-based Graveyard Hate. Also, you barely have any white mana in the deck to begin with. It's just 4 Razortide Bridges and 4 Drums, so you can't even ensure that you're gonna be able to play it. So yeah, you're better off just playing Affinity if you're gonna do something like this. But anyways, thank you for the submission, AbstractMarcher. So our next deck comes to us from Joelthelobo. And let me see if I can figure out what this is. So it's Bant Bean Turns Control for Modern. Let's see if we can put this in a visual format. All right, so we've got a 4-color mana base, Sans Black, and 1 Mistveil Plains. There is, there is black, Zagoth Triumph. Okay, then we've got Rings, Beanstalk, Leyline Binding, Counterspell, Cosmic Rebirth, Force of Negation, Prismatic Ending, Verdict, Lorien Revealed, Time Warp, Approach of the Second Sun, Teferi, Endurance, Omnath, Solitude, Chalice of the Void, March of Worldly... Oh, so this is the sideboard. Chalice of the Void, March of Otherworldly Light, Stern Scolding, Veto, Dress Down, Spreading Seas, Endurance, Kahira, Verdict. Okay, so it's just Beanstalk, Omnath pile, but with some different cards. In particular, the big differences, I would say, for cards that you don't normally see in these lists are Mistveil Plains and Approach. So we already have decks that are very similar to this. There's just all the Omnath pile decks, and then there is the Taking Turns deck that uses Cosmic Rebirth and whatnot. But so I think Approach of the Second Sun is just not as good of a win con as just playing a value game. In particular, the Taking Turns deck usually plays Ewit, and then you can do Ewit loops with like Rebirth and Ephemerate. And the fact that this deck is lacking any of that is a pretty big issue. You also really don't have much to interact with the opponent early in the game. You've got Ending, and then Leyline Binding on 2, and maybe Counterspell. And then the only 3 drops are 3 Teferis and an Endurance. So I feel like this deck can get run over too easily. And it kind of feels all over the place with like 2 Force of Negation instead of more than 2. It's got only 3 Beanstalks instead of 4. It has... And then I don't think it even has that many Beanstalk hits, right? It's 4 Bindings, Time Warp, I suppose, counts, and Lorien Revealed, and Solitude. Maybe that's enough. I don't know. This feels pretty awkward, and I don't have any idea why Mistveil Plains is in this deck. Like, is it just so that if, like, Approach of the Second Sun gets countered, you can put it back in your deck and do it again? I feel like the Taking Turns deck or Omnath piles are both just better versions of what this deck is trying to do. I also don't feel like the deck is really substantially different than those, other than obviously the specific card choices. So if I was going to do this, this seems more similar to Taking Turns. I would just play Taking Turns over this. So if I can bring that up. So this is the Taking Turns deck that we played on stream. Now this one I feel like is much better. You have better things to do early on in the game with Ephemerate, Utopia Sprawl, and Philology as a way to fill up your graveyard and have a blocker. It's got Ewit loops that can get out of hand, and you're not bothering with like Omnath or Solitude, whatever. Like if you're on the Time Warp plan, then you're playing a different kind of a value game than the regular Omnath piles are, and you can only have so many big, expensive, like 4+ mana cards. The Ring and Solitude and Time Warp are already plenty. Then you're adding like Omnath and Verdict and other stuff in there as well. It's going to get pretty clunky. This deck, I feel like, just plays a better value game. And Omnath piles, I think, also just play a better value game. But anyways, thank you for the submission, Joelthelobo. So our next deck comes to us from Coxic459. And this looks like a Legacy deck. Okay, so it is 4-color, just like Beanstalk value pile, missing red. So we've got Stoneforge and then Batterskull and Cauldron to find with it. We've got 2 Murktides. We've got Bowmasters, 1 Dress Down, then Binding Beanstalk, 4 Brainstorms, 1 Force of Negation, 4 Force of Will, a bunch of lands, including like the one of fetches or the one of duels in the different colors, 2 Teferis, Ponder, and Lorien revealed. And then the sideboard has Carpet of Flowers, Containment Priest, Deafening Silence, Flusterstorm, Hydroblast, Lavinia, Paradox Zone, which is basically a big value mid-range card, Plague Engineer, Surgical, Veil of Summer. So the issue you're going to run into whenever you try to do stuff like this is that there are already, so there's cards that are really lean tempo decks, like Delver, that are just 2 colors or 3 colors, because there's like Temur and Grixis Delver now with Beanstalk or Bowmasters. And then there is the more like value-based piles, like 4-color Control or the Zenith decks. I feel like this is worse than either of those. So you're in too many colors and too many slower, clunkier threats like Stoneforge Mystic to be a tempo deck like Delver and whatnot. But you also don't have as many value cards. I don't know if this is enough spells for Murktide either. You've got Swords, but you can't always cast that proactively or want to. And then you've got Brainstorm and Ponder, and then sometimes you can cycle Lorien Revealed. So I would have to look at a Delver list to see how many spells they play, so let's do that. So for example, this is a recent Delver list from October 1st that went 6-0, and the amount of spells that they have for Murktide is Brainstorm, Bolt, Ponder, Heat, Daze, and then Force of Will. So you're not casting these all the time, but let's say that's 22 spells. Let's just say that counts, right? 22 spells. And so in this version, you have what? 13, 23? I guess it is enough. It just doesn't look like enough to me. I don't know why. But there is also a difference between cards like Swords to Plowshares and cards like Bolt and Heat, maybe, but I don't know. It's probably close enough. All right, so I guess there is enough for Murktide. The other things are, I feel like you always just want to be on 4 copies of Bowmasters. This card's completely busted. Just play 4 of them. Stoneforge has the issue of there's Cauldron Complete, and then after that, most of the other equipment are just not good enough. I definitely think Batterskull is just straight up not good enough for Legacy and Modern anymore. So, but the issue is that you run into is that you kind of want a second equipment so that your next copy of Stoneforge isn't just a dead card. But I wouldn't play Batterskull. I would probably play something like Jite or Shadow Spear over that. Otherwise, it looks fine. I just feel like it's probably not as good as the other decks that are already doing something similar to it. I guess this deck is the most similar to something like 4-color Control. But man, like 4th Aerolingus is a nuts card, and this deck doesn't have access to that. The 4-color Control decks also tend to play like straight up huge card advantage engine cards on their own. So the Ring or Minskin Boo or, you know, cards of that nature. And this deck doesn't have any of those either. So this is kind of like a mix between 4-color Control and Stoneblade. I'm just not really a fan of Stoneblade. Again, because I just think Stoneforge like isn't nearly as good as it used to be, especially Batterskull, although Caldra's still good, but that's fine. And then the amount of things that trigger Beanstalk in this deck is also not that great. It's basically 2 Murktides, 4 Leyline Bindings, and then the 4 Force of Wills. So 10 cards trigger it. How many cards trigger it in a typical Delver deck? Murktide, Force. No, this doesn't have Beanstalk. Let's make sure we find one with Beanstalk. All right, Hooting Mandrels, Murktide is 5. Force of Will, 9. Sinkhole, 10. I guess, once again, it is. It just doesn't look like it to me, but I suppose it actually is. All right. It's very close, though. Like, obviously, the deck is still playing a bunch of good cards. So, I mean, it's probably fine. Like, if you took this to a Legacy tournament, you'd probably do fine with it. I just think it's not as good as plain old Delver with the red cards or plain old 4-color Control. But anyways, thank you for the submission, Coxic. So then next we have a submission from ocyocyocy. This is Modern Mono Green Stompy. They say, only play this if you're a true masochist who does not care about the concept of a meta. Well, it's definitely looking like that. So what do we got? Aspect of the Hydra, Rancor, Tyvar Stand, Vines of Vastwood, creatures on 1 are Dryad Militant, Hex Drinker, Pelt Collector. 2-drop Scavenging Ooze, Strangleroot Geist, Werewolf Pack Leader. 3 mana Dismember, oh, so 1 mana Dismember basically. This is the removal spell in the deck because you're mono green. And then Groundbreaker and Steel Leaf Champion. And then a bunch of green lands, including Horizon Lands and Treetop Village. Sideboard, Oof, Force of Vigor, Gutshot, Heroic Intervention, Pithing Needle, Run Afoul, Terra Sunder, Veil of Summer, Void Mirror. Okay, well, this one's going to be pretty short. The deck's just not good. Like, every card in the deck's bad, basically. Yeah, every single card in this deck is bad, other than the lands. They're just not up to the modern power level anymore. This is way too slow. Creatures just are not good enough. I mean, yeah, I don't know what more there is to say. You said it yourself, OC. Only play this if you're a masochist. But anyway, thank you for the submission. Our next deck, Rona Combo, comes to us from Dilloned. So, all right, Rona Combo. I presume this is the same Rona Combo that we're familiar with. So we've got Rona Herald of Invasion and Mox Amber and Retraction Helix. Okay, so infinite mana. And then what else we got? Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, Urborg Possession, Abrupt Decay, Shovel. 2 mana, 1/3 Death Touch. On upkeep, if your opponents control no permanents with bounty counters on them, put a bounty counter on target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Whenever a permanent an opponent controls with a bounty counter on it dies, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Fae of Wishes, JVP, Likeness Looter. 2 mana, 1/1 flying, loot, tap to loot, X. It becomes a copy of target creature card in your graveyard with mana value X, except it has flying and this ability. Activate only as a sorcery. So I guess this is Rona copies 5 and 6 in case Rona dies. See the Truth, Wishclaw Talisman, Tyvar Shieldred, then a bunch of bug lands, including Mana Confluence and Plaza of Heroes, and sideboard includes Abrupt Decay, Aetherflux Reservoir as your Fae of Wishes target to win the game, Duress Amber, Nashi Moon's Legacy, Bug 3/4 Menace Ward 1. Whenever it attacks, exile up to 1 target legendary or rat card from your graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy. So I guess this is once again a card that can, when it attacks, make a copy of any of your legends that have died. Negate Raven Feeblement, the 4th Retraction Helix in the sideboard in case you need to Fae of Wishes for it, and 4th Mox Amber for the same reason. Tamiyo Safekeeping, Tamiyo Collector of Tales, and The End. Cost 2 less to cast if your life total is 5 or less. Exile target creature planeswalker, and then extract all the rest of them out of their deck. Well, I mean, this is just the old Rona Combo that we've already seen and played many times before with some unique card choices. However, I think all of those unique card choices are bad. So Shovel is bad. Likeness Looter's not good either. I understand the idea, but it's too expensive. 2 mana to cast, then 2 mana to activate to become Rona. See the Truth also is only good when you're flashing it back with JVP, so every other time it's not good. Wishclaw's okay, but I think you're better off just, like, you can't activate this until you're going to win the same turn, which means you also need to just have a Rona in play. If you ever activate this and your opponent has removal to, like, kill Rona or, like, disrupt your combo, that's so terrible if you give them the opportunity to tutor. Shieldred, I guess, is nice in terms of having a different payoff bomb that can win the game on its own that isn't the Rona Combo. But I mean, yeah, this is just Rona Combo, but just with a few unique card choices. So I don't really know what much there is to say about it. So thank you for the submission, Dilloned. Next, we've got Mono Blue Tempo by Jokel for Pioneer. And they say, this is probably my best Pioneer deck, and I brewed it up completely on my own. I wanted to play something focused on Baral, Chief of Compliance, and this is what I came up with. Weirdly enough, it's good against Modern Burn, as I've won like 4 such matches. Kind of odd, I guess you're playtesting against your Modern Burn friend. Okay, so what are we doing here? Baral, Chief of Compliance, but there's only 4 of them, despite the fact that the deck is apparently built around this. So this is Pioneer, and it's Mono Blue Terror? Delver? Okay, we've got Consider Delver, Fading Hope, Ingenious Prodigy, X and Blue, Skulk, ETB with X+1 counters on it. Upkeep, if it has 1 or more +1 counters on it, you may remove a +1 counter from it if you do draw a card. So it's kind of a late game mana sink where you spend a bunch of mana, cast this thing, and then it's a blue Phyrexian arena, basically. Baral, change the equation, Ledger Shredder, make disappear Malevolent Hermit, negate Reckoner Bankbuster, Brazen Borrower, disallow, Tolarian Terror, 1 of, Dig Through Time, Treasure Cruise. And then a bunch of blue lands, including Otawara, Mystic Sanctuary, Hall of Storm Giants, Castle Vantris. Sideboard, Stroke, Essence Scatter, Horned Locked Whale. Owner of Adventure Side, owner of target attacking creature you don't control puts it on the bottom of their library, and then it's a Flash Ward 2 ETB tapped unless it's your turn 6/6. JVP number, just JVP number 1 in the sideboard. Mystical Dispute, Narset's Reversal Needle, Silent Gravestone. Cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities. Not sure why this is here. Spell Pierce, Witness Protection. So I would have to play the deck to see how good it is, but it doesn't look good, at least to me. I feel like if your deck is built around Baral, you really want to be making use of that by having a bunch of cheap spells that it's reducing the cost of. And this deck has some of that with like counter spells, but that's kind of like, oh wow, so your 2 mana counter spells are 1 mana. I mean, that's all right. And then Treasure Cruise, you have to delve 1 less card. Like, this does not seem great. Now, I'm only familiar with Baral in Storm decks, but I think the same kind of concept still applies here, which is that you want cards that are instants and sorceries that cost between 2 and 3 mana that the Baral is reducing the cost of, that draw you more cards. And I don't see any of that here. I also see cards that I definitely don't like at all, like Fading Hope, Ingenious Prodigy, Bankbuster in your Baral deck doesn't make any sense to me. This should be, again, you just want instants and sorceries that draw cards. I don't like Malevolent Hermit. I feel like if you are going to be a cheap Delver deck, you need to be playing more Ledger Shredders. Also, like Reckoner Bankbuster with Delver doesn't make any sense. There's just not enough spells here either, right? You're playing a Delver deck, so you need the absolute maximum amount of spells that you can play in the deck to flip Delver and for Brawl to cheapen, but you've got Prodigy, Ledger Shredder, Malevolent Hermit, Bankbuster, Brazen Borrower, Tolarian Terror. Way too many creatures. I think you want to slim this down and figure out what is your deck trying to do, because Delver and Baral are doing completely different things. Delver and Tolarian Terror are cards that say, and like Ledger Shredder, are cards that say, I want to be a tempo deck. I want to play a bunch of cheap spells and cheap threats and get through my opponent really fast. And Baral says, I want to play a value game where I reduce the cost of my spells. So these two strategies do not go together. I don't like Disallow. You don't want to be playing 3 mana counter spells. You also cannot play cards where you say, well, this card's really great if you have Baral in play. Yeah, but is it good if you don't have Baral in play? Because you can't count on having Baral in play. And also, once again, if you're playing Baral, you should just be playing 4 copies of Baral. And then Treasure Cruise is better than Dig Through Time. Play 4 Treasure Cruises before you play the first Dig Through Time. The only exception is if you're some kind of combo deck where you need to hit very specific cards, but this deck isn't that. So you just want Treasure Cruise instead. And also then there's the tension where Treasure Cruise and Tolarian, the Delve spells and Terror fight against each other. Or rather, the Delve spells fight against Terror, because you want to Delve, but you also want lots of spells in your graveyard for Terror. I also think that Terror is just not a good enough Pioneer card. Like, this card's good in Pauper, but in Pioneer, you have really huge creatures and strategies that kill you on turn 3 and 4, and this is not going to do it. Sideboard, I don't like Locked Whale. That's basically, and I don't understand why Gravestone is in here either. Other than that, I guess the rest of it looks fine, although I'd probably play around with the numbers of these cards. So I think, aside from tweaking this, you just need to figure out what is your strategy here. Like, what are you trying to do? Because, yeah, again, Delver and Baral are just opposed strategies. But anyway, thank you for the submission, JoeKel365. So our next submission comes to us from swedishkow. It is Goblin Storm, and apparently they have a primer on it. So in their comment, they say, I'll do my part and submit my favorite high-power casual EDH deck. And is it combo Spellslinger deck with Ovika Enigma Goliath as its commander? Oh, okay, so this is a commander deck. Oh boy, we got a lot to go through here. All right, let's look at the primer first. Woo, this is extensive. Okay, so what are we doing here? Combos and well, actually, first before that, let's just figure out what is the commander. So the commander is Ovika Enigma Goliath. This is a 7 mana, 6/6 flyer, ward 3, pay 3 life. Okay, so what's its ability? Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create X 1/1 creature tokens, where X is the mana value of the spell, they gain haste. So presumably the strategy here is to play spells that cost a bunch, or that you can loop to like make infinite 1/1s, and then kill your opponent either by hasting 1/1s into them or like sacking all the 1/1s for value. All right, let's read their primer. Combos and Tutors cheat sheet. Ovika Enigma Goliath, Krark the Thumbless, and Phyrexian Altar. Copy all instants and sorceries. What is Krark the Thumbless? Because this link is broken here. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, flip a coin. Oh, so it's this guy. If you lose the flip, return that spell to its owner's hand. If you win the flip, copy it. I don't really see how that goes infinite with Phyrexian Altar, but sure. Muddle the Mixture lines. Muddle the Mixture is a tutor that, due to how the deck is constructed, you can get answers for most situations. However, it is often mana inefficient to do so, and since it doesn't count towards Ovika's ability, can sometimes be clunky to use. I prefer to tutor with Muddle the Mixture the turn before I try to go off so that I have the most resources available. So Mystical Tutor or Solve the Equation finds Muddle the Mixture. Muddle the Mixture finds Moonsilver Key, which finds Phyrexian Altar and Ashnod's Altar. That is way too many steps. How much mana are you spending to do this? 3 mana to transmute, then another 3 mana to cast and activate Moonsilver Key, and then another 3 mana to cast the altars, so you're paying 9 mana. Muddle the Mixture to Sorcerer's class. More mana efficient than tutoring Moonsilver Key into Altar, but more restrictive in its applications. Muddle the Mixture into Spiteful Banditry. ETB, deal X to each creature. Whenever one or more creatures your opponent's control die, you create a treasure. This ability only triggers once a turn. That does not sound good. Oh, but it can just tutor a board wipe, I guess, if you have a bunch of mana. Muddle the Mixture for Impact Tremors or Goblin Bombardment as finishers. Talaria West mainly fetches Scavenger Grounds, Mystic Sanctuary, and Emergent Zone. If the deck is upgraded, it could fetch Pact Negation. Gamble, use this to get whatever, but do note that Past in Flames is often the best target due to it not mattering whether it ends up in the bin or not. The aim of the deck is to ramp with Mana Rocks and or Treasure into Ovika Enigma Goliath, then use the various card draw effects, examples Kindred Discovery, Skull Clamp, Archmage Emeritus, with Sacrifice Goblin for mana effects, Skirk Prospector, the Altars. The win cons are either making a critical mass of goblins and winning with Beatdown, Surge to Victory, 6 mana, exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Creatures you control get +X/+0 until end of turn, X is that card's mana value. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to the player this turn, copy the exiled card. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Goblin ETB damage effects like Perforos, Impact Tremors, and finally a semi-lock with Opposition and Junk Winder. 7 mana, affinity for tokens, 5/6. Whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, tap target non-land permanent and opponent controls. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Oftentimes, your turns 1 to 5 are spent casting Mana Rocks, getting key permanents into play, or interacting in order not to die before Ovika is out. When we play Ovika, we are looking for a couple things. We should see if our opponents are holding mana that should be enough to pay for the ward cost. Then we also prefer to cast Ovika with something in our hand that can let us storm off the following turn. Strengths of playing this deck is fun and unique storm spell slinging, the flavor of a tribal deck while still maintaining a lot of strengths, fast game plan with its wins usually between turns 6 and 8, so not a CDH deck then, interactive game plan, and ability to play on instant speed. Weaknesses include untargeted removal, i.e. Soul Shatter and Shieldred's Edict, board wipes, artifact, and land hate. To a lesser degree also graveyard hate, creature decks with a fast game plan. Often in deck building, adding cards that aren't splashy or make a huge impact are what's more fun, leading to many decks not containing enough basic draw, card selection, or ramp. What Ovika Enigma Goliath does is make all of our vegetables into the most juicy, restaurant-prepared, grease-baked, fantastic vegetables ever. Great vegetables. Our Mana Rocks are ramp, but on a later turn can be mana-positive goblin makers, because it's any non-creature, yeah. Thusly, this deck makes the most of it and plays a lot of vegetables. We are vegetarians on New Phyrexia. Why play 3 cantrips with only 34 lands? Why not cut for 37 lands? This is a good question, and I wouldn't blame anyone for preferring a higher land count. The reasoning is that the cantrips help us on early turns to get the lands we want or spells that give mana, giving a higher chance to have enough mana for Ovika at turn 5 to 7 than running more lands. They are also not dead draws on later turns. On the contrary, they are very good as they draw cards, are often mana neutral, and make goblins. Mamie board or to be tested. Cavern Horde Dragon. The spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest number of artifacts and opponent controls. Flying Trample Haste. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact the player controls. Big Dragon with potentially huge upside of a low mana cost and high payout, but highly dependent on one opponent playing artifacts. Not very hyped on this card in this deck, but worth trying. Cheating on mana, but sadly creatures so no extra goblins. Invasion of Kaldheim. When it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from your hand, then draw that many cards. Until the end of your next turn, you may play them this way, and then the battle side says discard a land, deal 2 to any, so it's Seismic Assault, and whenever you discard a land, exile the top card of your library and you play this card. A wheel for storm turns that can also turn the lands you draw into impulse draw, and damage might fit this deck. 4 defense also means it can get one shot by Ovika, which is really good. Alright, so we've been through all of that. Let's look at the actual cards in the deck. So when you're looking at an EDH deck, it's I think more helpful to sort by the kinds of effects the deck has rather than mana value. So let's look at it via type. All right, so Ovika, we want to be playing spells that are non-creatures, and preferably we want those spells either to be very, very expensive, but have reduced costs somehow, so like Treasure Cruise or whatever, so that we make the maximum number of goblins while paying the least amount of mana, or we want to be able to loop the spells. So what do we got? Invasion of Segovia. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 blue Kraken creature tokens with trample, and then the backside is non-creature spells you cast have Convoke, which I imagine is quite good with Ovika. And at the beginning of your end step, untap up to 4 target creatures. All right, I like this inclusion. Archmage Emeritus, Junkwinder, Krark the Thumbless. I don't like Krark, but, well, actually, I guess that's triggers on casting the spell, regardless of whether you actually resolve it or not. Yeah, okay, Krark's fine. Perforos is fine. Skirk Prospector, Stormkiln Artist, and you get treasures whenever you cast spells. All right. Blasphemous Act. I don't like this because I feel like it runs directly contrary to what you're doing. Distant Melody, sure. Faithless Looting, Gamble, Lorien Revealed, Past in Flames, Ponder Preordain, Solve the Equation, Surge to Victory, Treasure Cruise, Vandal Blast. So Surge to Victory as a way to make the creatures get pumped. You don't need this. You can just play, what is that card? It's 3 mana. Like, if you just want to pump your whole team, there's a better way, there's a more efficient way to do it than this one. Like, presumably, this card, I understand that it can exile cards off the top, but the idea I think is supposed to be that you pump your whole team and then kill the board. So, or kill everyone via the board. So instead of that, I think you'd be better off playing Shared Animosity. Whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. So you're making all of these tokens with Ovika, and then you can attack, and all of your tokens will get +X for every other attacking token. And it's and it's half the cost of Surge to Victory. So I feel like that's better there. So probably look at including that. Vandal Blast is nowhere near as good as it used to be. I don't think Vandal Blast really holds up in EDH anymore. Abrade, I definitely don't like this as a 1-for-1 removal. 1-for-1 removal is generally not good, but when you do have it, it needs to be as absolutely cheap as possible, and 2 mana is too much. Offer You Can't Refuse, Arcane Denial, that's fine. Big Score, this seems pretty iffy. Born Upon a Wind, you may cast spells this turn as though they had flash, sure. But I feel like so your turns are either going to be combat wins or combo wins. So I guess this does enable combo wins in a sense. Chain of Vapor, Chaos Warp. I don't like Chaos Warp. I think it's too expensive. Consider, Counterspell. I don't see Brainstorm in this list, so that kind of confuses me. Dig Through Time, Fact or Fiction. Also, Counterspell is just worse than Mana Drain, so this should just be Mana Drain. Fact or Fiction is not good in EDH. You need to be drawing way, way more cards than what Fact or Fiction does, especially for how much it costs. Frantic Search, March of Swirling Mist, Meeting of Minds, that's fine. Muddle the Mixture, I don't like transmuting for 3 mana, it's too expensive. And this really is not good about actually grabbing your combo pieces. Mystical Tutor, Negate, Snap, Transcendent Message, X blue, 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 Convoke, draw X cards, but the tokens are red and not blue, so your minimum always at least paying 4 blue for this. So to me, this feels like it's way too expensive. Unexpected Windfall, and then Artifacts. Signet, Ashnod's Altar, Commander Sphere, don't play 3 mana rocks. They're not efficient. They're just nowhere near efficient enough to actually work. Cursed Mirror might work if you already have like a Stormkiln Artist or something in play, but you don't even have that many creatures to begin with, so I wouldn't bother with that either. Felwar, Fire Diamond, the diamonds are also not good. Coming in tap's a problem. Cluestone, Lock, yeah, again, just cut all these 3 mana rocks. None of them are good. Signet, Midnight Clock, Mind Splice Apparatus. This is too slow for EDH. Moonsilver Key, Phyrexian Altar, Skull Clamp, Sky Diamond, Talisman of Creativity, Thought Vessel. Yeah, cut all your 3 mana rocks and find better 2 mana rocks to replace them with. Also, there's no Soul Ring, there's no Mana Crypt, there's no Mana Vault, there's no Grim Monolith. Like, if you're playing a 7 mana Ovika, you need to be ramping as hard as possible. And I'm missing all of those cards. Now, maybe it's for budget reasons, but at least, because you did talk about like upgrading the deck and the primer, but if the budget is not an issue, those are all cards that should be included. And then enchantments, Goblin Bombardment, Impact Tremors, Kindred Discovery, Mana Echoes, Mystic Remora, Opposition, Rhystic Study, Sorcerer Class, Spiteful Banditry. All right, and then the lands. Castle Vantress, this is not EDH playable. It's way too expensive. Command Tower, Emergent Zone. I'm also not a fan of Emergent Zone. Evolving Wilds is definitely not playable. Oh yeah, okay, so I see that you're having budget issues with the land base as well. Snarl, Molten Tributary. Yeah, all right. So this has to be 100% a budget issue, right? Because this should be, 11 fetch lands, duels. Like, is there even a Steam Vents in here? Yeah, there isn't. Okay, so I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know. Just the land base needs to be upgraded into a better land base. Also, the thing is, like, it's EDH, just proxy stuff. You don't have to spend money on a volcanic island. Just make a proxy of it. Other than that, I think I've been through all of this. Mostly, I just don't like cards that are so expensive. So, like, Junk Winder, although I guess it has affinity for tokens, so it's not actually expensive. I feel like I would want, with how many cheap spells you're playing, probably a Treasure Cruise in here, because it's a 1 mana, draw 3 that also gives you 8 tokens. So like Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, like anything that has Delve or otherwise reduces its cost, I would want in here. So yeah, to recap, cut things that are too expensive, like Transcendent Message. Even Perforos is like, you already have 2 mana versions of basically the same effect. Perforos, Chaos Warp, 3 mana rocks for 2 mana rocks, Soul Ring, Mana Vault, like add all the better ramp, add all the better lands. But yeah, Ovika definitely seems like a fun commander. I guess it's a better version of the Locust God, right? Essentially. So yeah, and then Shared Animosity to make the tokens more lethal. So yeah, that is my thoughts on your deck. So thank you for the brew, Swedish Cow. So our next one is not a deck per se. This comes to us from Sean Thomas, and they say, I don't have a list, but I'd really like to see you try to make a Mindcrank combo deck in either Modern or Legacy. Mindcrank with either Duskmantle, Guildmage, or Bloodchief Ascension. So to explain this combo, Mindcrank is a 2-mana artifact, and it says whenever an opponent loses life, that player mills that many cards. And then Bloodchief Ascension says, at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. And whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life if you do gain 2 life. So if you get to 3 quest counters on here, so if your opponent loses life 3 separate times on different turns, then you get the quest counters. And then whenever your opponent mills or loses life, it triggers one or the other, which triggers one or the other, and it goes infinite. And then similarly, Duskmantle Guildmage is 2 mana, 2/2, 3 mana. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere this turn, that player loses 2 life. And 4 mana, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So the problem with the Mindcrank combo, apart from the cards doing absolutely nothing when you have them independently of each other, is just getting all of this stuff to work in the first place. So first of all, Duskmantle Guildmage is just not playable. It's way too expensive. 2 mana to play this creature, and then another 3 mana to activate it. You can never count on the creature sticking around because it's only 2 toughness. So you probably have to play and activate it in the same turn in order to immediately get something going, which means you need to pay 5 mana. But then it's not like these cards immediately combo with each other either, because then you still need a way to make your opponent mill or lose life to start the chain reaction. And then also one of your combo pieces, and then your other 2 combo pieces is an artifact and an enchantment. So you get absolutely killed by Force of Vigor or just any other artifact enchantment removal. Bloodchief Ascension requires life loss across multiple turns. And while you might sometimes be able to get that off of like a shock land of your opponent, you can't count on that. So then your deck needs to also have ways to make your opponent lose life. So it's just way too many hoops to jump through, way too many things that need to be assembled and put together before it works. And again, as I said earlier, the power level of Modern is way too high for janky combos like this to work anymore, and never mind Legacy. But I do like the idea, and this is another one of those shelve this in the back of your mind. Like, maybe at some point something happens where another card gets printed that makes Bloodchief Ascension or Mindcrank actually good, or another card gets printed that makes them more viable in some way. But thank you for the submission, Sean Thomas. Our next one comes to us, Tortex Gates. I think they meant to say Tortex because of Tortured Existence, from Peter36K. And they say in their comments, Spicy Popper Tortex brew, the spice is Gates. So it's Popper Tortex, but it's running Basilisk Gate and the other gates. And then this is all the various cards you would expect in a Tortex deck to begin with. So Spore Frog, Urborg Repossession, Commune with Gods, Mire Triton, Secure Tribe Elder, Satyr Wayfinder, Golgari Brownscale, Stinkweed Imp, Dread Return, Thorn of the Black Rose, Lotleth Giant Writhing Necromass, Golgari lands, including the gates, and then sideboard is Duress, Fairy Macabre, Ghastly Demise, destroy target non-black creature if its toughness is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. Knot of the Bone, Gurmag Angler, Naturalize, Shrivel, Tameo Safekeeping. So a bunch of thoughts right off the bat. We did play Tortex on stream, although we played a bad version of it. So we didn't play like the actual classic Tortex deck, but From what I can see of this deck, here's my thoughts. So when you play the gates, you are inherently saying that you think that the power level of Basilisk Gate is worth having your lands be worse because of coming in tapped, right? Now that can work if you're like a slower deck that can make up for the gates in some way, like you have lots of cheap blockers or removal spells, and this deck kind of meets those requirements. So I think the gates plan can work, and you can put gates in other decks besides just Caw Gates. However, there are lots of cards here I don't like. So first of all, 4 Stinkweeds and 2 Brown Scales I think is just incorrect. Although I would need more practice. I would need practice with the deck to actually say that for sure. But the life gain on the Brown Scale does matter. And dredging, you can't like afford to dredge too much because you will actually run out of cards. So it's possible that you want to dredge just Brown Scale. Although the Stinkweed Imps do help you dredge into the Brown Scales, and then you can dredge those instead. So maybe that's fine. I think 4 Necromass is too many Necromasses. And the fact that you can use Tortex to get them back means you probably don't need 4 of them. Although I understand that using Stinkweed Imp, you're just trying to like put as much stuff in the graveyard as fast as possible. I don't think you need Dread Return at all. Like at all. And I don't think you need 2 copies of Lotless Giant. Now, also, this deck is distinctly lacking any way to loop creatures. So, I mean, you do have the Dredgers, but the deck really should have Graveyard Scrabbler in it so that you can Madness it into play and have go positive on cards when you use Tortex. And then lastly, if you're gonna run Gates, you really should be playing Gate Creeper Vine. So to pull up Gate Creeper Vine. So Gate Creeper Vine is a 2-mana green creature, 0/2 defender. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land or a gate, reveal it and put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So I understand that it has defender and therefore it is not a viable target for Basilisk Gate, but it also finds you your gates and is kind of doing exactly what this deck wants. Cheap creature can just block, finds your gates, finds you a land essentially. So if you're going to run gates in a green deck, I think you should just run Gate Creeper Vine. So yeah, Gate Creeper Vine and Grave Scrabbler are like the cards that are missing the most from here. And I don't think you need Dread Return or as many copies of Necromass as you've got. And then in the sideboard, Ghastly Demise, removal spells that don't work early in the game are not good. Just play a different removal spell than this, because this is going to be off too many times when you need it to matter. Like if you're against Kuldotha Red and then this just doesn't kill their creatures until turn 3 or more, that's a problem. Also, Naturalize can probably just be replaced by Nature's Claim because you don't really care about your opponent's life total in this deck since you're just going to plan to grind them out. And then Shrivel is another thing where every single time in the Pauper Leagues I played a deck that played a -1 toughness effect rather than a -2 toughness effect like Drown in Sorrow, I always regretted it. There's too many decks that go wide that have 2 toughness creatures where it really matters. So against Kuldotha Red, for example, they have Monastery Swiftspear that you really want to kill. Or the Kiln Fiend decks, those creatures, a lot of them have 2 toughness like Kiln Fiend itself. Against Boros Synthesizer, you want to be able to kill Glint Hawk. Against Caw Gates, you want to be able to kill Archaeomancer. Like, there's too many creatures with 2 toughness. I don't think the 1 mana really matters. I think Drown in Sorrow or some other card that also does -2 is better than Shrivel. Other than that, I think that's basically my thoughts on the deck. I also don't know about Mire Triton, although I understand its usefulness, but I also just feel like this could just be a better value card, but who knows. Anyway, thank you for the submission, Peter36K. Our next deck comes to us from Alex Coat 9243, and it is 5-color Yorion for Pioneer. They say in their comments, Pioneer Yorion Fires would like to see it played, enjoying your videos and how go guides. Well, there already are. So Fires is an established Pioneer deck, and there are 2 versions of the deck. There's the Karuga version, and then there's the Yorion version. So the basic idea is that Yorion tends to be the slightly better value card than Karuga, although it's pretty close. And Yorion is obviously better with more ETB trigger cards, whereas Karuga can afford to not play ETB trigger cards. The downsides are, of course, Yorion requires that you play an 80-card deck, and thus you dilute your deck with worse cards because you're playing 20 extra cards. And Karuga's downside is that you can't play cards that you would like to play that are cheaper. You can get around the mana value problem with Karuga via cards like Bonecrusher Giant and Brazen Borrower, but you still are hamstrung in terms of playing cheap stuff like Chain to the Rocks is a card that's good in this deck that Yorion can play, but Karuga cannot. So the idea is you are a 4 to 5 color, usually 5 color, just value deck. You just play a bunch of value cards. And I don't know, we've been over Fires before. If you want to recap, I've got guides on it and I've got gameplay on it. But So this version is playing, let's see, Chain to the Rocks, Up the Beanstalk, Rip, Omen of the Sea, Oath of Chandra, Fires of Invention, Enigmatic Incarnation, of course, Heliod, Radiant Dawn, Siege Rhino, and then all of the tutors, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Deputy of Detention, Archon of Emeria, Glasspool Mimic, Hanged Executioner, Knight of Autumn, Moonblessed Cleric, Skyclave Apparition, Alishnorn, Canrith, Karuga. Oh, you're main decking a Karuga. Tulsamir, Binding, Atraxa, Dragonlord, Atarka, Coma. And then a whole bunch of lands of various colors and restrictions. And then the sideboard has Destiny Spinner, Veto, Fry, Leyline of the Void, Mystical Dispute, Radiant Flame, Supreme Verdict, Temporary Lockdown, Yorion. Okay, so let's see. First of all, Beanstalk is slightly questionable. I don't know if there's enough here. So there's the 4 bindings and then there's these expensive guys, but a lot of times these guys get cheated in via Enigmatic Incarnation. So I don't know how many times you're actually casting them to trigger the Beanstalk, although you're always triggering Beanstalk with Yorion and it's a blink target, so maybe that alone is good enough. And it is an enchantment that you can filter away via Enigmatic Incarnation. So the cards that I don't like are, I don't like Rip. I don't think that's doing enough for you. Rip is only good against certain decks and not good against others, and I feel like it's just having it as a one of main board card that you have no way of tutoring for is an issue. That's probably better relegated to the sideboard. Then it also makes no sense that you have 2 Rips here, but then 2 Leyline of the Voids here. It feels like pick one or the other. Also, I personally don't like Leylines because I'd like my cards to be able to actually do something when you don't have them in your opening hand. But if you are going to play Leyline, you really should be playing more than 2 copies. The other thing is Radiant Flames doesn't work with Fires because it depends on the number of colors that you spend on it. So if you cast it via Fires, then you don't actually spend any mana. So I would prefer this to be a different sweeper effect like Anger the Gods or something. Although I understand that you can technically pay less than 3 colors in order to keep certain of your creatures alive, like Archon or Deputy of Detention or whatnot. But I think in most cases, that's not too much of an issue. And then you might need to play around with certain of these. 3 different 7-drops feels like a lot. You can probably cut one of these and then sideboard it in. Like, probably Coma is the card that's the least relevant in the main deck, and you can side it in matchups where it matters. Same thing with, like, the 5-drop slot seems really packed here. Like, I feel like Karuga doesn't need to be here. Oh, what else? Fry, I would rather just have Rending Volley in this spot. 1 mana versus 2 mana is important, and you really, really, really need to be able to kill mono white creatures and Greasefang as fast as possible. And being 1 extra mana can be the difference. Siege Rhino's not playable, cut that. And then I don't like Hanged Executioner either. Other than that, it's a pretty typical Fires list. I don't know if these lands are stock or not, but you know, it's a whole bunch of all the different colors of lands. Having 80 cards when you have to find Fires or Incarnation can be miserable if you get Thought Seized even once. Yeah, well, there's trade-offs to the Yorion and Karuga versions. I guess you could also play a deck that doesn't have either companion, but yeah, that's basically my thoughts on the deck. I'm trying to see if you're missing anything that is usually typical of this deck. Let me pull up my Fires version. So this is my version of Fires, and although I haven't tested this extensively, but the main differences are like the Shieldred, for example, and just like different cards here. It depends on metagames, it depends on evolving. Also, this hasn't been updated in 2 months, so this could be out of date as well. Cavalier of Dawn also can just be a thing that hits permanents that you need to hit. It's not a huge difference, though. It's probably fine, and the Beanstalk update might be relevant as well. But anyways, that's my thoughts on it. Thank you for the submission, Alex Cote 9243. So our next submission comes to us from Christopher Arens 7110. And they say, an absolute mess. I have managed to take games off of the meta, but it's basically just worse than Adnaz at the end of the day. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Multi-Modern, a format that my friends and I play that consists of 100-card non-singleton decks with the modern card pool. Multiplayer, but 20 life start. I have some videos on decks in the format on my channel. Well, my thoughts on any of those like custom formats that are not mainstream custom formats are that if you and your friends enjoy it, then it sounds fine, but it's really hard to break into the mainstream with any sort of a custom format, particularly because if it's not a competitive format that's supported by WotC or on Moto or whatever, then you're going to have a hard time getting people to play it. And if it's a casual format, everyone already plays Commander and has a Commander deck, so it's more of an ask to get them to play a whole new format with new cards and a new deck that they have to build. But as always, if you and your friends enjoy it, then yeah, good luck to you on that one. So as for the deck, Ad Nauseam Grapeshot, and then this is cut off. So Ad Nauseam Grapeshot version 2. So let's see. We've got 1 Ad Naus, we've got 4 Grapeshots, Monomorphos, Desperate Ritual, Pyretic Ritual, Scheming Symmetry, Intervention Pact, Lotus Bloom Bauble, Pact Negation, Profane Tutor, and then a bunch of various lands. And then sideboard, Angel's Grace in the board, not in the main. Bolt, Veil, Slaughter Pact, Duress. Well, you said it in your comment, looks just worse than Ad Naus. So yeah, Intervention Pact doesn't work with Ad Naus. So Intervention, the next time a sorcery of your choice would deal damage to you this turn, prevent that damage, you gain life equal to damage prevented this way. So this card doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know why this is here. So Ad Naus can win in 2 ways. Obviously, you can just win with Oracle, or you can use an Offer You Can't Refuse to counter your own stuff. So the Offer You Can't Refuse is a deck where you actually would play Intervention Pact. You Ad Naus your whole deck, and then you Offer You Can't Refuse your own 0 mana spells, and you use the treasures to cast Lightning Storm, since Simian Spirit Guide is banned. Also, you don't need 4 Grapeshots. Like, if you're playing Grapeshot, you should just be able to kill your opponent with 1 Grapeshot, maybe 2. Don't need 4. Yeah, looks clunky as hell. Looks like it's just worse than regular versions of Ad Naus, and Ad Naus is not even good in Modern anymore to begin with, so you said it yourself. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say about this. It's just a worse version of a deck that's already not good enough. But thanks for the submission, Christopher Ahrens. Our next deck comes to us from Timothy Stevens, 1924, 8 Pyromancer. So we're playing Third Path Iconoclast and Young Pyromancer, and then presumably a bunch of spells to make it work. So this is a Pioneer deck. And let's see, we've got all the cheap cantrips, so Consider, Opt, and then we've got so then we've got Chrome Host Seed Shark as, I guess, like another Pyromancer. So it's technically 10 Pyros. Hercule Master Wizard, Memory Deluge is a 1-of. Treasure Cruise, Fiery Impulse Strangle, of 1 mind. Make Disappear, Unsummon, Torch the Tower, that's basically Shock, but sometimes it's Bolt. It's Bolt if you bargain a token. And then Fabled Passage Field, Den of the Bugbear Hall, Mountain Island, Odawara Subkenzon, Storm-Carved Coast, and then the 3rd Impulse down here. And then in the sideboard, Gust, Test of Talents, Roast, Stroke, Dispute. Well, I think right off the bat, cards that are not good are Unsummon, Hercule, and probably Strangle. I feel like you want your spells to be instant speed, and you're playing so many spells anyway that Fire Impulse should just be 3 damage most of the time anyways. So I don't think you want the sorcery speed Strangles. If you're playing of 1 mind, you should be playing 4 of these for the Pyromancers, because any spell is going to trigger any of these, so you'll almost always have the requirements for this. So you should just have 4 of these. And then I don't think you need the Chrome Host Seed Shark, since you already have 8 of these guys to begin with. What else? Fabled Passage sucks in this deck. You always want your lands to be untapped. Same thing, you don't need double Odawara or double Sokenzon. You can just have 1 of each. The whole point of these lands is that they're free, quote unquote. And when you have a second one, sometimes you Legend Rule out the first one. You don't need Field of Ruin in this deck either. The only deck that Field of Ruin matters against is Nykthos, and you should beat Nykthos via counter spells and just flooding the board with X1 worth 1/1 tokens. What else? I don't know what Test of Talents is for. Other than that, I think it's fine. Although Consider is better than Opt. You should have 4 Considers before 4 Opts, because you have Delve cards, so that matters. Yeah, that's basically my thoughts here. So thank you for the list, Timothy Stevens. I don't think the list is good enough to actually play, though. I don't know, but it feels like just a worse version of Arclight Phoenix is the problem. So moving on, we've got a submission from Marklin1797 called Liquimetal Jank for Modern. Ooh, the Liquimetal deck. I have tried to brew this deck before myself, so let's see. They say, deck for Modern, you combo with Liquimetal plus Alter plus Saheeli. Otherwise, you turn things into artifacts and steal them or destroy them. Generally, you play the control game till you assemble your combo using Karn and Saga for combo tutors. Okay, so this is going to be a deck that's going to be built around Liquimetal Coding and Liquimetal Torque, which are 2 mana, and you turn things into artifacts. The difference between Torque and Coding is that Torque is also a mono rock, but it can't target lands. So then we've got Ragavan, Bolt, Spell Pierce, Prismari Command, Abrade, so that you have a main deck removal spell that also hits artifacts, so that you can turn the opponent's lands or whatever into artifacts and then Abrade them. Counterspell, Saheeli Rai, Karn, and then lands, Urza Saga. You've got Alter the Brood Relic, and Thieving Skydiver in here as well to steal artifacts. So let's see. Then what can Karn get? Alter, Chalice, EE, Liquimetal Coating out of the sideboard, and Ensnaring Bridge. I don't know why Batterskull's here. This is not a modern playable card anymore. Don't play Batterskull. Emrakul also doesn't make any sense. Is this just here to stop mill? Like, that seems bad. Anger of the Gods, Rip Path, Flusterstorm. Again, you're a Karn deck. You need to be playing Karn sideboard cards. So either you should have a Tormod's Crypt or Relic of Progenitus or some artifact-based graveyard hate in here that Karn can go fetch up. You probably need other Karn targets as well, like Pithing Needle, Ballista, like just other things that you can grab with Karn. Yes, Karn demands a very big sideboard devotion to him. Path to Exile is not good. Don't play that. What else? We've got 8 removal spells. I don't know how good a Braid is, but I understand that it's working with this strategy here. Thieving Skydiver I don't think is good. It's too expensive, and you specifically cannot name 0 with it, so you can't steal your opponent's lands with it. Token copy of Saheeli can copy itself. Infinite ETBs with Alter in play, but it can't. Oh, is it not legendary? It's too small on the screen. Let me read Saheeli. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature you control, except it's an artifact and the copy is an artifact. Okay, so it's not just a straight up copy. The copy is already an artifact. Gotcha. So Liquimetal makes Saheeli an artifact, or Torque makes Saheeli an artifact. She copies herself. The legend rule kills the original one. Then you've got an artifact Saheeli in play, which copies herself, etc., etc., etc. Gotcha. Okay, I didn't read the card. I thought it made just a straight up regular copy. So yes, if you have any of the Liquimetal cards plus Saheeli plus Alter the Brood, then Saheeli copies herself infinite times and you win. It's still kind of awkward because you need 3 different cards in play to combo, and one of them is a Planeswalker that dies to any piece of burn. I wish that if Saheeli is going to be in this deck, that there were other ETB cards that mattered that she could copy, because as is, she can't really copy anything. Yeah, like she literally doesn't copy anything in here. Except for, I guess, like Relic of Progenitus. That's it. So she has no value aside from the combo. It's interesting. I think this deck needs a lot of work, though. There's just like... So I've tried putting together the Liquimetal deck before as well, because I think it's an interesting synergy. But it's never really come together, again, because just the power level of Modern is so off the scale at this point. One card I do think is a good inclusion is Shenanigans, which is a shatter that dredges itself, because then if you do have Liquimetal coding, you can always get Shenanigans back from your graveyard every turn, and then just keep strip mining their lands every single turn, one after the other, or just keep strip mining their threats one turn after the other. And then I feel like if this deck is going to be built around the Liquimetal cards, you want 7 of the Liquimetal cards main deck, and then have the 8th one in the sideboard for Karn. I don't really know why you would only play 6. There's so much artifact hate to shut this deck down. There's that too, like... Your combo is 3 different pieces. It dies to any burn spell, and it dies to... Well, actually, it dies to any instant speed spell that is burn or hits permanence. So Leyline Binding also stops it. Force of Vigor stops it. Like, it gets stopped by a lot. It's definitely interesting, though. If this were, like, a Pioneer deck, I would be interested in playing it. But Modern's power level is just so off the charts that... I don't think much of any brews can actually compete anymore. Saheeli is legal in Pioneer, and so is Alter, but the codings are not. I wonder if you could make this combo work in Pioneer somehow, if there's a Pioneer card that turns permanent into an artifact. It doesn't look like there is, though. But yeah, if you're going to do this, I think this deck requires extensive testing. You'd need to figure out if Bolt is good, if Ragavan is good, if Spell Pierce and Prismari are good, if Counterspell is good. Thieving Skydiver I don't think is good, and you'd need to play around with the sideboard a lot. But my initial reactions are that a lot of this deck is probably not playing towards the combo in a good enough manner. I don't like Skydiver. I think you do want at least 1 Shenanigans in the deck, and then you don't want Path in the sideboard, and you might want Rip, but you don't want it for... You want, like, artifact-based graveyard hate, at least 1 piece in the sideboard, like the second Relic in the sideboard. Anger of the Gods isn't good. And I think you can just cut white altogether and have a cleaner mana base, especially when you're an Urza Saga deck, and cut Batterskull and cut Emrakul. But anyways, thank you for the submission, Marklin1797. Oh, and as someone in the chat points out, you don't have a way to answer Stony Silence, so if your opponent Stony Silences you, then you just lose. So there should be like a Cityscape Leveler or something in the sideboard that Karn can grab that blows up Stony. Our next submission comes to us from Pile is Cool. It's called Clerics and Taxes, and apparently it's a Modern deck. They say, I've been brewing this Cleric and Taxes list in Modern after noticing how many pieces of Death and Taxes are Clerics. I love Clerics, and I've always wanted them to work in Modern. Any feedback would be highly appreciated. So to look at the list, we've got Giver of Runes, Auriok Champion, Aethersworn Canonist, Leonin Arbiter, Stoneforge Mystic, Anointed Peacekeeper, Righteous Valkyrie, Solitude, and then we've got Aether Vial, Shadow Spear, Sword of Light and Shadow, Cauldra, Touch the Spirit Realm, 1 Ephemerate, 2 Miria's Calls, a bunch of lands, including Blast Zone, Demo Field, Field of Ruin, Agonjo, Ghost Quarter, Horizon Canopy, Plains, and then sideboard, March of Otherworldly Light, Path to Exile, Damping Sphere, Leonin Relic Warder, Sanctifier, Onvex, Soulless Jailer, Fiend Hunter. Okay, well, the first thing that immediately jumps out to me is that you're saying you love Clerics, but none of these cards actually care about Clerics in any way. A bunch of the creatures are Clerics, but they don't care about Clerics. So as is, it kind of just looks like a mono-white D&T list. Aside from that, the cards kind of seem all over the place. You've got your Leonin Arbiter as your anti-search card, which is usual, and then Stoneforge. And it's okay that these don't interact well, because they're good enough and you can sort of play around it so that you play Stoneforge first and then Arbiter sometimes. Anointed Peacekeeper, whatever, but then Righteous Valkyrie seems really odd. Like, this deck does not have a good way of gaining life. Your only ways of gaining life are the 2 Auriok Champions, which is not going to be anywhere near enough life for Righteous Valkyrie to matter. You can Solitude your own stuff, that's bad. You can Solitude and gain life with Solitude way later in the game, which is also bad. And you can gain life off Sword of Light and Shadow, which is also bad. So right away, just cut Righteous Valkyrie. Sword of Light and Shadow's not good either, cut that. And then we've got Touch the Spirit Realm and Ephemerate. Ephemerate's better than Touch the Spirit Realm by like a lot. So you probably just want to play 4 of these. But even then, I don't think you even want to play that many Ephemerates, because your only Ephemerate targets are Solitude and 4 Stoneforges. And then after that, and any Stoneforge after the first Stoneforge is just nowhere near as good, because you grab Cauldra and then every other equipment's bad. And then, what else? Auriok Champion's not good in here either. It's just too meager. I don't think you want Blast Zone in this list. And then once again, you got the problem of it's a modern deck in a format that is completely overtaken by rampant bullshit to the point where every other deck is being pushed out. D&T is not playable anymore. Let's see. But if I were still going to... But if you're going to say, oh, I don't care, I love playing D&T, I love playing Clerics, I want to play the deck anyway, then my suggestions would be cut Auriok Champion, cut Aethersworn Canonist from the main deck, because this is just going to be a dead card in too many matchups. There is... Another problem is, like, Aether Vial isn't even as good as it used to be. Valkyrie gains life when you play Clerics, does it? Oh, it's not just Angels, it's also Clerics. Equal to its toughness. But your Clerics don't even have that much toughness, right? 3, 2, 2, 1, 2. So it's not even that much. And Righteous Valkyrie is good in, like, Pioneer Angels, where you have 1, other things that also gain life, and 2, creatures with more toughness. Also, Pioneer is a lower power format. And you have Coco to hit multiple creatures at once. And as I was saying, Aether Vial is just nowhere near as good as it used to be. I think it was already not great to begin with, because it's a card that basically just sucks any turn after turn 1. But the power level has gotten so out of hand that even Aether Vial is not that great anymore. So if you're interested in playing, like, do you want Cleric synergies, or do you just like Clerics to begin with? Because there's other Cleric synergies that you could go with. Or I guess not. I guess I spoke too soon, because I just looked it up and there really just aren't. I assumed there would at least be a Cleric Lord somewhere, but I guess there isn't. So yeah, I guess it's just Cleric... I guess Righteous Valkyrie is like the best Cleric Matters card. Yeah, well, my thoughts stand. There's a lot of cards here that can be jettisoned, and like Sword of Light and Shadow, Canonist, Auriok Champion, Touch the Spirit Realm. And if you're going to play this deck, understand that you're going to lose hard to just all the modern nonsense that's running around. But if you enjoy it, you enjoy it. Like, you know, I always have the thought process with any deck when if someone asks me, hey, you know, suggest some improvements to the deck, I can say, well, if you want to win, you shouldn't be playing this deck. But if you really love the deck and you want to play it anyway, then here's the best version of what you want to play. So thank you for the submission. Pile is cool. So then our next submission comes to us from Smith John 4679. It's called Rectal Intervention. So we're up for something real interesting here, I guess. Something really spicy. So I guess this is playing with Divine Intervention. Right away, I don't like that, but let's examine the rest of the deck just to see what's going on. So I guess this is a Legacy deck. And we've got Abundant Harvest, Cabal Therapy, Thoughtseize, Veteran Explorer, Assassin's Trophy, Diabolic Intent, Fiend Artisan, Once Upon a Time, then 1 Vampire Hexmage, Eldritch Evolution, Recruiter of the Guard, Skyclave Apparition, Academy Rector, I guess that's where we get the Rectal part from. Moat, Sandworm Convergence, Overwhelming Splendor, and then Divine Intervention. And then a bunch of lands, including Phyrexian Tower, so you can sack your Veteran Explorers and Academy Rectors. And then sideboard is Oof, Gaia's Blessing, Leyline of Sanctity, Leyline of the Void, Pernicious Deed, Stony, 1 Thoughtseize, 3 Veil of Summer. Okay, so... And then their comment says, hey, this is a Legacy Abzan deck revolving around enchantment memes and cheating stuff in with Academy Rector before drawing the game with Divine Intervention. Friend of mine has been brewing it since middle school, and I would like to see you play it. Well, you're unfortunately not going to see me play it because Divine Intervention is just bad. Like, there is no point in setting up all of this stuff only to then draw the game and start over. If you are getting to the point where you are sacking Academy Rector and you are cheating in an enchantment, that enchantment should just win the game, such as Overwhelming Splendor, such as Sandworm Convergence, and not draw the game. But if we just set this aside and pretend that this Divine Intervention isn't here, then the rest of the deck is basically Abzan Nickfit because of the Veteran Explorer, and it's using Academy Rector to go find stuff like Splendor, Convergence, and Moat. Now, apart from that, I guess Sandworm Convergence is the one that's the most able to win the game because it spews out a bunch of 5/5s. And then I guess what? The Hex Mage is in here to remove the counters from Divine Intervention. It doesn't do anything else. And then Diabolic Intent finds Academy Rector. Eldritch Evolution finds Academy Rector. I would rather not play a Diabolic Intent. I would rather just play more copies of Eldritch Evolution. So you can just put Academy Rector directly into play. But then I guess you would need to play more 2-drop creatures. This kind of feels really clunky. Recruiter of the Guard here to go find Academy Rector, I guess. This feels really, really clunky. There's just a lot of cards here that are really slow, like and require a lot of costs, like Diabolic Intent. Also, there's only 3 basics in this deck, and you're playing Veteran Explorers. You need at least 4, so that the second one also fetches stuff. All right, so we've seen this concept before of the get your Academy Rector into play, sack it, go grab an enchantment that wins the game, right? But, okay, the cards I don't like are Trophy, Intent, Fiend Artisan, Hex Mage, and Divine Intervention, obviously. I don't really like Skyclave for Legacy. Eldritch Evolution would be good if you had more 2-drops to sack to it. And then these are all fine. So then the problem is that you don't have an enchantment that actually just straight up wins the game. Like, you're jumping through all of these hoops to get Academy Rector out. And then, so first of all, how many things do you actually have to sack this? You've got Cabal Therapy, Eldritch Evolution, Phyrexian Tower, which means that a lot of times, even if you get this into play, you're not going to have a way to sack it. Secondly, when you actually get your payoff, like Moat and Splendor don't win the game. So then Sandworm Convergence is the card that most wins the game in a sense, but even this doesn't win the game. It's slow, and you can still die to all sorts of combo decks or just flyers that kill you. Like, this doesn't stop Merit Lage, for example. Oh, wait, no, it's the opposite, right? Creatures with flying can't attack you, so it doesn't stop any non-flyers, which is most creatures, I would assume. So it stops, like, Merit Lage, Murktide, Darcy, Delver. That's basically it, eh? All the other ground creatures can still hit you. You could play Omniscience, but then you'd need to rebuild the whole deck to work with Omniscience so that you had a way to like combo off and win after getting Omniscience into play. You cheat Divine Intervention or the other big enchantments into play with Rector. Yeah, you get those. What do you mean you both can win the game in 2 turns? Moat stops non-flyers, Sandworm stops flyers, but then you need 2 Rectors. So you're talking about finding 2 different Rectors and sacking both of them to go find Moat and Convergence. Your combo needs to win on the spot. You need to go get Rector into play, sack it, win the game immediately. Let's take a look at what are like the big payoff enchantments that we can just completely win with. Now, Overwhelming Splendor will essentially win the game against certain decks, because if all of their creatures are crappy 1/1s, that may win the game, but there's also tons of decks that this doesn't matter against. There's also the problem of like, there's more enchantment removal than ever with Force of Vigor, Leyline Binding, etc. So you can't count on even like a Sandworm Convergence sticking around to win you the game. You need to sack Rector, and then that wins the game. So let's go find it. Yeah, so that's going to be the problem. So the only one that actually wins the game is essentially Omniscience, but then you also need a bunch of other stuff to actually win the game with. And Show and Tell is just doing a better job of putting broken stuff into play than this deck is. So the Academy Rector plan could have... This is another put this brew in the back of your shelf, in the back of your mind, shelve it type of thing, where the concept of getting Academy Rector and sacking it to go, play some busted enchantment is a good one. The problem is we're just lacking a busted enchantment. Kind of like how for a really long time Stoneforge wasn't very good, and then they printed Cauldron Complete, and now it's good again. This is missing a you win the game on the spot enchantment. So yeah, a lot of bad cards to cut, a lot of synergies that need to be changed, like more basic lands with the Veteran Explorers. But the core concept of the deck with Academy Rector just doesn't really work. Unless you're going for Divine Intervention and you're just like, I don't know, trolling people, because that's what the card does since you don't actually win the game with it. So if you want to troll people, A+ effort here. But anyways, thank you for the submission, Smith John 4679. So then we've got 2 brews that come to us from ONTB21. Here are some modern decks me and my friends have made. So the first one, Is It Breach? Let's take a look at this. So we've got a Through the Breach deck. So it's a Through the Breach Emrakul deck. Gotcha. All right. So we've seen this kind of deck before. It's blue-red control with Through the Breach to cheat out Emrakul. And then the rest of the deck is essentially just a blue-red control deck or tempo deck. It's got Ragavan, Snapcaster, Opt Preordain, Counterspell, Blood Moon Force Negation, Prismari Command Fire Ice, Bolt, 2 Jaces, and then Through the Breach. And then a bunch of Is It lands. So let's see, a couple of thoughts. I would rather that this deck played more at instant speed, so I would rather than have Preordain maybe Consider instead, because I want to be able to like Snapcaster at instant speed as many things as possible. And your deck is not playing Darcy, so you don't care about Delirium. I think Jace is actually just straight up worse than the Ring. I think you just play 4 rings. And what else? You've got 3 bolts and 2 Fire Ice and then 2 Prismari commands. And this is not enough cards to get Ragavan through the opponent's board. You need to be playing more removal. Prismari command you can't count on because it's 3 mana and it only does 2 damage. So if you're going to be playing Ragavan, you need to be playing at least 6 removal spells that cost 2 or less, if not more than that. And if your alternate win con is going to be like, you know, there's Bolt, Snap, Bolt is the old expression for Modern, then you just need to be on 4 bolts. What else? Vendilion Click's not playable anymore, cut that. And then you're also a Blood Moon deck, it's fine. I don't really like Force Negation in this list, but it might be fine. Like the problem is, so this is fine if you're trying to combat like, I don't know, Cascade or something, but if you're trying to force Through the Breach into stuff, I guess it's good with Through the Breach because you can Through the Breach at the end of your opponent's turn and then have Force up. All right, so that makes sense. And then what do we got in the sideboard? Flusterstorm, Shattering Spree, Relic Progenitus, Hurkyl's Recall, Narset, Blood Moon number 3, more Forces, and Days Undoing. So you pivot into like a Days Undoing deck with Narset. I don't know why Hurkyl's is in here if you already have Shattering Spree. I guess it's better against like Urza Saga tokens. But yeah, cut Click, consider playing Consider instead of Preordain, play more removal spells to get Ragavan through the opponent's stuff, and then Jace is worse than the Ring. I see a lot of Artifact Flood deck at my LGS, so that's for the Hurkyls, sure. Could you not just play Shatterstorm, or are the decks too fast? I feel like this is only relevant if you're bouncing the Saga tokens. If you're actually just trying to straight up kill everything, I would rather play Shatterstorm. I guess Hurkyl's pairs better with Snapcaster though, but I guess that's fine. Yeah, we've seen a lot of Through the Breach decks in the past. I think the problem is they're just worse than Murktide. Murktide's just so ridiculous. Darcy's so ridiculous that they just wind up being a worse blue-red deck. And we already have like all the like Emrakul is the best thing you could possibly cheat out. So the only way that I could see the deck getting any better is if there's a game-winning bomb creature that is also just like actually castable when you don't have Through the Breach in blue-red colors, which there currently isn't. But anyways, thank you for that submission. And then the second submission is Poxpires. So what is this doing? So we've got a black and white something or other deck, Bloodghast, Silver Smoke Ghoul, Edgar Charmed Groom, Shieldred, Cling to Dust, Inquisition, Damn Prismatic Ending, Diabolic Intent with, all right, and then Liliana's, Thoughtseize, Sorin, Smallpox, and then a bunch of black and white lands, including 2 Castle Lockwains and Fetid Heath, and a Savai Triome. Okay. Sideboard, Push, Drannith Magistrate, Dothy, Vindicate, Damping Sphere, Stony Silence. What does Edgar Charmed Groom do? 4 mana, 4/4, other vamps get +1. When it dies, return it transformed. Upkeep, create a 1/1 with lifelink, and put a Bloodline counter on this. Then if there's 3 Bloodline counters, remove those. Okay, so, oh boy, where to start? Okay, so it's basically black-white Pox, right? A couple of things. Oh boy, yeah, there's so many problems with this list. It's hard to figure out where to start. Okay, first of all, there's no reason to play Savai Triome. You don't have red in your deck. You don't have anything that cares about having basic land types. Cycling for 3 is awful. Just don't play Savai Triumph. Next, Fetid Heath. I don't like filter lands. I think they suck. Oh, it's for Prismatic Ending. That still just feels bad. Yeah, I wouldn't bother with that. Fetid Heath, I understand that Fetid Heath allows you to go turn 1 Flagstones, turn 2 Fetid Heath into Smallpox. I would want to test more to see if that's actually worth it. In general, I've found that the filter lands suck, like really badly. So I'm very skeptical of this being a good inclusion. The next problem is practically your entire deck is black, including many cards that you want to play on turn 1, like Thoughtseize and Inquisition, and cards that are double black on turn 2, like Bloodghast and Smallpox, and then double black on turn 3 with Liliana of the Veil, and you got basic plains in here, and no fetch lands. That is just not going to cut it. I frankly don't understand why you don't have fetch lands. I don't see any reason not to have fetch lands. What else? This deck is playing cards that are too expensive if you're also playing a Smallpox deck. You're playing Smallpox and you are therefore losing lands. Sometimes you won't because of Flagstones, but oftentimes you will. And you're playing Shieldrids and Edgars and 3 Mana Planeswalkers. And like, this is just too expensive of a curve if you're Smallpoxing. Smallpox works in a deck like 8-Rack, where all your spells cost 2 or less, or maybe sometimes you've got like a Liliana or 2, but basically all your spells cost 2 or less. Silver Smoke Ghoul has absolutely no way of coming back other than Sorin. I understand that these two pair well together because you can just keep helixing over and over. But if you don't have Sorin out, then this card's a dead card, as is Bloodghast. And then Sorin also is just not even that good with these cards, and it doesn't have like some awesome giant vampire to cheat in like a Galta. Edgar Charmed Groom also sucks. Cling to Dust also sucks. Diabolic Intent, you have 8 creatures, and Shieldred and Edgar. But other than 4 drops, which should already be the top of your curve and winning the game anyway, you have 8 creatures. That is not enough. 8 creatures, one's a 3-drop, and another one is Bloodghast that you're Diabolic Intenting. Like, this feels like a mess. This feels like a massive mess. You also got double Castle Locthwain in your deck, and you have 9 cards that are swamps. And then all the rest of your lands are not swamps, meaning these are going to come in tapped most of the time. And you also have a bunch of cards that are really expensive, meaning you don't have a lot of time to either have the mana to cast these things and have mana up to activate Castle. And you also don't have a good way of getting lots of cards out of your hand for Castle because your cards are expensive and you're smallpoxing away your lands. So this feels like just a massive, massive mess. Just a massive mess on all fronts. You need to figure out what you're trying to do with this deck and focus on that. Is the deck a smallpox deck? Well, then you need to be playing 4 smallpoxes, first of all, not 3. And secondly, you need a lower curve. And then I don't know why there's 3 Thoughtseize, 2 Inquisition. Like, just play a full 6 with the 4 Thoughtseize. Is the deck a Sorin deck? Then you need to be playing giant vampires that Sorin can cheat in, because that's the best thing he can do. Is the deck a control deck that is using like Prismatic Ending and Dam and like removal spells? Then you need more removal spells and like potentially more sweepers, and you need to not play these crappy guys that are not control cards. This feels like a deck that's going in like 4 different directions and can't decide on what it's trying to do. Pick a lane and stick to it. All right, so that is the end of that deck. Thank you for the submission, Owen. All right, so next list. This is from, I'm not sure what the username is, For the Boys at the Cheeky Mate, or if it's Shiber, but this deck is called H&K. Here's my Hidetsugu and Kairi clone list for EDH. All right. So what are we doing here? Hidetsugu and Kairi is a 5 mana, 2 blue, black, 5/4 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, draw 3, then put 2 cards from your hand on the top of your library in any order. When Hidetsugu and Kairi dies, exile the top card of your library. Target opponent loses life equal to its mana value. If it's an instant or sorcery card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. So you want to have this, and then you want to have a super expensive spell that you flip over that the life loss part's probably not the relevant part. I'm assuming the casting it part is the relevant part. So you want Hidetsugu and Kairi. You want to be able to kill it so that you get the trigger, and then you want to win the game off of whatever giant spell you play, right? So let's see. What do we got in the rest of the deck? So I think for EDH decks, it's usually better to sort by card type because the mana value part doesn't matter too much. It's more about like what the cards do. So we've got a battle, Invasion of Amonkhet. ETB, each player mills 3, then each opponent discards a card and you draw a card. All right, I'm not a fan of that. So what does the back of it do? You may have Lazotep Converter, end of the battlefield, as a copy of any creature card in a graveyard, except it's a 4/4 zombie. Yeah, not a fan of this. Deadeye Navigator, Drivnod. If a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a opponent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time, so you get double triggers off Hidetsugu. Urtai. This is too expensive. Whether it be a counterspell or removal, it's too expensive. Keen Duelist. Upkeep. You and target opponent each reveal the top card of your library. You each lose life equal to the mana value of the card revealed by the other player. You each put the card you revealed into your hand. I don't like drawing my opponent's cards. This seems bad. Mirror Image, 3 mana for clones too much. Phyrexian Metamorph. This one at least copies artifacts. Ruthless Technomancer. ETB, you may sack another creature if you do create a number of treasures equal to its power. Okay. So I get that this is sacking Hidetsugu and Kairi, but I really want to play Hidetsugu and Kairi and then just sack it immediately and not have to pay 4 mana to do that. Shadow of Mortality. Don't know why this is here. All right. And then we've got all the artifact ramp. So Signet, some 3 mana artifact. Don't play that. Mindstone, Nim Death Mantle. Sure. Prismatic Lens. There's got to be like 1,000 2 mana rocks that are better than this. Soul Ring, Talisman of Dominance, Wayfarer's Bauble, don't play that. And then Worn Power Stone's, I guess, somewhat defensible. So you're missing a bunch of better mana rocks like Crypt, Vault, Grim Monolith, etc. But even so, just don't play 3 mana rocks. They're not good. Play 2 mana rocks. Then there's Mirror Mockery. And whenever a enchanted creature attacks, you may put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of it. Exile it at the end of combat. This doesn't make any sense to me because this triggers on dying. So this doesn't even do that. I guess unless you're playing this and then copying it and then sacking the copy, but I feel like you should just win with this thing. The idea is to make copies, sack them to the legend rule, and dish out high mana value damage and then cast them for free, possibly making more copies. I feel like this is a lot of hoops to jump through, right? You're paying 5 mana for your commander. It has to not get countered or killed. Well, I guess it can get killed. It has to not get countered or exiled by like Swords to Plowshares. And then you probably want to sack it instantly. Like you don't ever want to be waiting a turn. You don't want to put this into play and then let the table go around and then do it. I think you always just want to sack it instantly, right? So a way that you can sack it for free or at least near free, something that's like 1 or 2 mana. And then you want whatever spell you hit off of it to be extremely good, right? Either straight up win you the game or be massive value for the amount of hoops that you've jumped through to do this. So let's look at the rest of this. Oh, also mana. Whew, this is a bad mana base. All right. As usual, I assume this is budget reasons. Upgrade this. And if you're like, well, I can't afford upgrades, proxy it. To me, it doesn't make any sense for EDH cards to be worth anything. In a format that is not a competitively supported format, that does not have sanctioned tournaments for the most part, that for the most part does not have prize tournaments, it makes absolutely no sense for for people not to just run proxies. Like, why would I spend, I don't know, how much is Dockside Extortionist right now? Insert EDH staple card that's $40. Why would I pay $40 for insert EDH staple card when I can just print a piece of paper? Now, I would spend $40 on the One Ring, for example, because I need it for Modern. And if I'm going to compete in these Modern decks, well, I have to have a real ring. If I'm going to play EDH and I need, I don't know, a Mana Crypt, I can just print a Mana Crypt. Yeah, I tried to keep it as budget friendly as possible. If you can't make money, don't spend money unless it's shiny. All right. Okay, so let's figure out what we're doing here. So we need ways of sacking it. We need to have big payoff spells, and we need ways of fixing the top card of our library. Offer You Can't Refuse, Brainstorm, makes sense. Cackling Counterpart doesn't make much sense. Although, I guess you go Cackling, you make a token copy, then the token copy dies, and then you get the trigger. Counterspell, this should be Mana Drain. Dark Ritual, Stroke, Faded Infatuation. Triple Blue is pretty rough. Hagra Mauling, Into the Story, Make Disappear, Mana Leak. Negate, Reality Shift, Resculpt, Sea Double, Sublime Epiphany. All right, well, a bunch of this stuff is not working. You need to have Mystical Tutor and Vampiric Tutor and Imperial Seal. Like, as many things that can put a spell on top of your deck as possible. There needs to be a Demonic Tutor in this list, which I see there isn't. There are also other cards that fix the top card of your deck besides Brainstorm. You just need to be playing more of that. Sublime Epiphany is way too expensive. A lot of these cards I don't like. Reality Shift, Resculpt, Mana Leak in EDH. There's so many better counter spells. Just get rid of Make Disappear. These are terrible. Get rid of all that. Get rid of Into the Story. I see that there's no Phantasmal Image in this list. If we're trying to clone copy this, Phantasmal is one of the cheapest ways to do it. I believe there's also another clone in the Doctor Who set that's 2 mana, if I remember correctly. That can be in here too. And then what's in our sorceries list? So first of all, before even getting to this, I see way too many expensive sorceries. You don't want like 20 expensive sorceries. You want just a few of them that are the bombs that you tutor or fix onto the top of your deck. Because what's going to happen is when you have all of these expensive sorceries, you're going to have lots of hands that can't do anything. So for example, I used to play a EDH deck, Mael de Anima. Mael de Anima is a Naya commander where you can spend 6 mana to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and put a creature among them onto the battlefield for free. So because you looked at the top 5, you had to have a certain density of big bomb creatures so that you could always find them off the top 5, so your spin wasn't bricked, which meant playing tons of expensive creatures, which meant that you had tons of hands that had all these creatures that you couldn't cast, which was quite bad. So you never want to have 20 different giant bomb sorceries. You want to have like 4 and then just tutor them. Anyway, so let's cut all the bad ones. So let's go through them one at a time. Aminatu's Augury. Exile the top 8. You may put a land onto the battlefield. Until end of turn, for each non-land card type, you may cast a card of that type from among the exile cards without paying their mana cost. I don't like this because it's entirely dependent on the random 8 cards you hit off the top, and if they're not good, then they're not good. Beacon of Tomorrows, take an extra turn, not playable. One extra turn, that doesn't matter. Blatant Thievery, this one's actually good. Blood Money, destroy all creatures. For each non-token creature destroyed this way, you create a tapped treasure. That's not good. I don't want to jump through all of these hoops for Hidetsugu to play a Wrath. Breach the Multiverse. Each player mills 10. For each player, choose a creature, planeswalker card in the player's graveyard. Put the cards onto the battlefield. Not good. Clone Legion. Make a token that's a copy of a creature. For each creature target player controls, create a token. Not good either. If you have a card that's dependent on your opponent's board state, then that means that plenty of times the card's a dead card. Because if their board state isn't advantageous to you, then it doesn't do anything. Curse of the Cabal. Sack half the permanents. Nope. Decree of Pain. We're not doing Wraths. Discovery Dispersal is in here. It doesn't actually fix the top. It just sees the top and allows you to make an informed decision, but it doesn't fix the top. Dread Return. Don't know why that's here. There's about a million other better reanimate spells that you could play, such as Reanimate. Feed the Swarm. No. Fraying Omnipotence. Definitely not. Garruk's Wake. Again, no. Mirage Mockery. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact creature you control. Create a token that's a copy of target non-artifact creature you control. Yeah, 3 mana clone, too much. Mnemonic Deluge. Exile target instant or sorcery from your graveyard. Copy it 3 times. That requires that you have it in your graveyard to begin with and that it's good. So now you've taken the setup of needing something on top, and now you also need something in your graveyard. Destroy all creatures. I'm going to stop reading at that point because, again, we don't want Wraths. Quasi-duplicate, more cloning. Rags to Riches. Definitely don't want this. You can't even cast the Aftermath part off of the trigger. Replication Technique. Demonstrate, create a token that's a copy of target permanent you control. Nope. Rite of Replication. Nope. 6 mana clone. Definitely not playable. Sakashima's Will. Choose one. If you control a commander, as you cast a spell, you may choose both. You gain control of a creature, and you choose a creature you control, and others become a copy of it. Nope. Stolen Identity. Nope. Tempt with Reflections. Nope. Time Stretch. 2 extra turns doesn't matter. Treasure Cruise. That's fine, because it's not actually 8 mana. Worst Fears. You control target player during their turn. Nope. And Zunderspult's Judgment. For each player, choose whether you create a token that's a copy of their creature or they bounce a creature. No. None of that. None of that. Except Blatant Thievery. So, okay, where do I start? We're missing the best ones. Okay, so here's all the 7 mana and up blue and black instants and sorceries that are legal in EDH. And so let's just go through the best ones. First of all, Enter the Infinite. I'm sure you could figure out a way to win the game off of that. Secondly, Expropriate. How in the world is that not on your list? This is the best one. This is just super Blatant Thievery. Eldritch Pact draws you a gargantuan amount of cards, as does Peer into the Abyss. So like those are the best ones. And then we also recently got in the Eldrazi Commander decks. Rise of the Eldrazi. First of all, it can't be countered. Secondly, it's destroy permanent, draw 4 cards, take an extra turn. That is the actual best extra turn spell, aside from Expropriate. So if you're gonna run sorceries that you're cheating in with Hidetsugu and Kairi, those are the ones to run. And then cut all the other ones that don't matter and are just all these expensive cards filling up your deck. You also need more mana ramp, especially at only 34 lands, including Seagate. So I've been through all the cards. It's a lot of changes to make, but that's what I would make. And you need, so I guess to recap, more mana ramp, cut the mana rocks that are 3 mana, better lands, better sorcery / instants that are the big bomb payoff, specifically the 3 ones that I mentioned. Cut most of these, cut all the clones that cost 3 or more, except Metamorph. Metamorph's okay. Bad counter spells, cut those, play better counter spells. And then like all these other cards that are just straight up bad, like Urtai, Invasion, Shadow of Mortality. And then play more ways of fixing the top card of your library. So aside from Brainstorm, you need like top deck tutors and a bunch of other ways of fixing. And probably just straight up more card draw. I also see there's no Rhystic Study, there's no Mystic Remora. You need more ways to draw cards that are regular, like good card draw spells. If you run about 3 or 4 of the bomb spells, is the goal to keep recurring them or to straight up just win? The goal is to win. If you cast Expropriate, you probably just win the game. If you cast Peer into the Abyss and you draw half your deck, you probably just win the game. You don't need to recur them. Anyways, thank you for the submission. I hope that my notes were helpful. So next, we've got a Mono Blue Spirits and Pioneer for OceanRain, and he's saying that it's very important that I note the anime artwork Spectral Sailor. So let's get a bigger image of that. So first of all, here is the original artwork for Spectral Sailor. And as you can see, we have a very scary pirate ghost. And then here is the blatantly superior waifu-esque anime Spectral Sailor. Clearly, OceanRain is a person of great taste. Just leave this on screen here for a bit to enjoy. And then the rest of the deck is, Mono Blue Spirits and Pioneer, so I don't know what much there is to say about this. We've got Ascendant Spirit, Brazen Borrow, Mausoleum Wanderer, Spectral Sailor, Rattlechains, Shacklegeist, Supreme Phantom, Curious Obsession, Spellpierce, Lofty Null, Geist Light Snare, Cemetery Illuminator, and Spectral Adversary. And then I have never seen this dude before. Lantern Bearer, Flying 1/1, Disturb 3. What does it disturb into? It disturbs into Lantern's Lift, an enchantment that says enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying. That seems kind of weird because all your creatures have flying already anyway, except sort of Ascendant Spirit before you level it up. So it's in here just to be a 1/1 that comes back as a +1 aura. That doesn't seem very good. Other than that, we've got Slip Out the Back, Witness Protection, Change the Equation, Reckoner, Bankbuster, more Brazen Borrows, Mystical Dispute, Shore Up, March of Swirling Mist, and Aether Sphere Harvester in the sideboard. And I mean, I don't know what much there is to say about this. It's Mono Blue Spirits and Pioneer. I guess OceanRain just wanted to show off their Spectral Sailors. And, if I were them, I would too. So thank you for the submission, OceanRain. All right, next we got more submissions by Fresh Prince of Ballet. So they submitted some more lists while we were in the middle of the stream. So The Sunwell is the first one. This is apparently a Pioneer list. And let's see what we got going on. Well, we got Agatha's Soul Cauldron as a 4 of. So let's figure out what we're doing here. Gotta be a combo deck of some sort, right? 3 Llanowar Elves, Sleep Cursed Fairy, Agatha of the Vile Cauldron, which is a reduce the cost of activating your activated abilities dude. Then Agatha's Soul Cauldron, so all of our guys that have +1 counters on them have the abilities of things that we exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron from the graveyard. Diabolic Intent, Fairy Mastermind, Fauna Shaman, Incubation Druid, JVP, Kinnon, Rona, but not Retraction Helix or Mox Amber, so we're not doing that combo. And then there's a Sararak, so I assume we have a way of making infinite mana, and then Tyvar and Coco, and then Buglands. Okay, and Agatha has no way to be cast in this deck, because we don't have red mana. I'm not missing anything, right? There's no way to actually cast Agatha. So there's no way to cast her, so we either have to Coco into her, or we discard her, and then we can't even activate her ability from the graveyard, because her ability costs red mana. Okay, so we've got Sleep Cursed Fairy, which untaps itself for 2 mana, and we've got Incubation Druid, which taps for 3 if you adapt it. So presumably the combo here is you have Incubation Druid, or Incubation Druid in your graveyard and Agatha's Soul Cauldron, but we have Incubation Druid's ability, and we have Sleep Cursed Fairy's ability, right? So we either literally have Incubation Druid, and then we have a Sleep Cursed Fairy in the graveyard and we Agatha's it. Or reverse, we have Sleep Cursed Fairy and we have Incubation Druid in the graveyard and we Agatha's Soul Cauldron it. Or we have both of them in the graveyard and we Agatha's Soul Cauldron both of them, and then all of our creatures have that ability, right? So we have a +1, so Agatha's Soul Cauldron puts the +1 counter on the creature, and then that creature taps for 3, and then it untaps for 2. So we make infinite mana, and then we win by just casting a Sararak and then chaining the dungeon over and over to win the game, right? And then we've got Fauna Shaman to both find stuff and bin stuff, so Agatha's Soul Cauldron goes off, right? And Diabolic Intent also to find stuff. And then all the rest of the cards in the deck are just value cards / ways of finding things. So like the Fairy Mastermind can also be a win con because you can, if you have more cards than your opponent, you can deck them, or you can just draw until you find a Sararak or a way to get it back, right? Incubation Druid and Cauldron, the mana can be any color. You may spend mana of any color to activate ability. Okay, so you can activate Agatha's. So then Agatha is also a win con because you can just pump your entire team infinitely and give them trample and haste. Gotcha. Okay, couple of thoughts. Let's see. I don't like Diabolic Intent. I feel like this is almost always better off as Eldritch Evolution. Eldritch Evolution can find every creature in your deck, no matter which creature you sacrifice. So you're paying 1 more mana for Eldritch, but then you're just putting the card directly into play. That feels way better than Diabolic Intent. Although I guess that Diabolic Intent also finds the Soul Cauldron, which is very important. But the Diabolic Intent just doesn't feel very good. I also feel like you don't need Fairy Mastermind. Like, if you need an activated ability to win the game, there's other better effects than Fairy Mastermind. You don't want to allow your opponent to draw cards, and there's just a million other ways of having an infinite mana outlet, like Agatha, for example. But even opposed to that, there's like the door wall thing, secret library keeper, whatever it's called, that also just like dungeons over and over. So let's see. I think I would run Rona over Jace, right? In most cases, you only have one spell. Okay, you have 2 spells to flashback, Intent and Coco. But Rona untaps when you cast Legends. Kinnon doubles up the mana on what? Does Kinnon matter here? Like, you only have 3 Llanowar Elves, and then your Incubation Druids also produce another mana, but they still don't go infinite with Sleep Cursed until you get a counter on them. What else? I also just feel like you need to be playing like more copies of the combo cards. Like, why are there only 3 Sleep Cursed Fairies? Just play all 4 of them so that you always have it. Like, just make sure you always have it. 3 Llanowar Elves is technically incorrect. It should be a split between Llanowar and Elvish Mystic because there are very corner case situations where that matters. For example, you have 2 Llanowar Elves in play and then your opponent Deccan Stones one of them and kills both of them. Whereas if you had Elvish Mystic, it would only have killed one of them. So technically incorrect. It should be a split. Other than that, let's see. I mean, it looks fine. The only question is going to be, is it better than just the traditional Rona combo deck that has Mox Amber and Retraction Helix? Because it's playing a lot of the same kind of plan. And then I would want to fiddle with the numbers a lot. Like, I think you'd need to test this deck a lot in order to figure out exactly which is better. Like, is it better to run Intent or Eldritch Evolution? Do you want more than 3 mana elves? Is Sararak even necessary if you also just have like Agatha to win the game anyway? Like, you can't win the game with a Sararak unless you already have an infinite combo, an infinite mana combo, at which point you could win with any infinite mana outlet, so it doesn't have to be a Sararak. And then, let's see, the sideboard, Gigantha is actually playable in this list. Raven Feeblement, Bankbuster, Shaper Sanctuary, Terra Sunder, Thoughtseize. So Shapers, I don't think is actually as good as people think it is, and I think you're a lot of times just better off actually protecting your creature than running Shapers, and specifically, you want to play Tyvar Stand, because Tyvar Stand both protects your creatures, and it's also an X spell that can kill the opponent when you have infinite mana. So I would replace these with Tyvar Stand. Also, I don't think you want Bankbuster in this list. The list already has a lot of looting effects anyway, and Coco, and it's not a Cocoable creature, and it's also not a creature that you have the abilities on. I mean, I guess you can crew it, but if you can crew it, then you have creatures in play anyway. And then other than that, I think it's fine. Yeah, when this card first came out, I definitely wanted to brew with it and figure out if I could combo this with anything, and I couldn't figure out anything at the time, but I guess Soul Cauldron helps you get there off of the Incubation Druid. It's definitely interesting. All right, thank you for the submission, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And then you've submitted another list, Goryo Mirror. So this is for Modern. And what? This is a Goryo's Vengeance list that's also using Beseech the Mirror. So what have we got? Nile Spellbomb, Pithing Needle, Cookbook. I assume we're playing Urza Saga? Yeah, all right. And then 4 colors or 5 colors. There's an Oracle in here. There's Goryo's Vengeance, Altar of Dementia, Shadow Prophecy, Teferi, Beseech, Grief, Solitude, Kroxa and Kunaros, Leyline, Atraxa. So Kroxa and Kunaros is when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may exile 5 cards from your graveyard. When you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So basically, it's combos with Altar of Dementia. So if you get Kroxa and Kunaros into play and you also have an Altar of Dementia, you can trigger on the stack, alter yourself, and then exile. So you alter, sacking this. You put 6 cards in your graveyard, you exile 5 of them, and you bring Kroxa back, and then you can just like mill your whole library over. And then on the last trigger, you get back Oracle instead of Kroxa. Refresh the list. My friend updated it. We got Grief in here now. I think that's the main update. I don't know. All right. So yeah, that's the Kroxa and Kunaros combo. So it's Kroxa and Kunaros, Goryo's Vengeance, Alter Dementia, mill your whole deck over, and then on the last trigger you get Oracle back. Or you can just straight up Goryo's into like an Atraxa to just get huge value. And then Beseech the Mirror can find any of this stuff. Beseech the Mirror can sack any of the artifacts, including Alter, but nothing else, right? I guess you can also sack Leyline Binding. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't think you ever want to sack Alter though. So 4, 8. So 8 cards you can sack, right? And then you can use Beseech to find Goryo's Vengeance and cast Goryo's, or you can use it to find Alter if you don't have that. Looks pretty clunky. So the thing is, when you have a Goryo's Vengeance list, when you cast Goryo's Vengeance, you should basically just win the game off of that alone, right? And a lot of times, if you Goryo's Vengeance and Atraxa into play, you probably have won the game just off of that, which means you don't need to go through this other loop, this whole rigmarole of having Alter plus Kroxa and Kunaros, especially when Alter and Kroxa and Kunaros are horrible cards when you don't have them together. So the traditional Goryo's Vengeance list is just playing Atraxa and then sometimes also like Gristlebrand and or Emrakul to win the game just off of those cards, and they'll usually also play Ephemerate because Ephemerate's really good with Grief and is okay with Solitude as well, and it's also really good with your Goryo's guys because you Goryo's in Atraxa, draw a bunch of cards with it, and then you Ephemerate the Atraxa, draw a bunch of more cards with it, and then the Atraxa sticks around after the Goryo's delay trigger happens. Whereas this version of the deck is doing the same concept, but the problem is that you're jumping through more hoops to do it. So now you not only need to Goryo's your Kroxa and Kunaros, but you also need to have an Altar of Dimension play. So it's more setup, whereas Goryosing the Atraxa would usually just win the game on its own anyway. And you're not playing Ephemerate or like the other cards that make the traditional Goryo's Vengeance deck much better. He sacks the elementals to fill the yard to find a creature to hit. That's still just not good. Traditionally, you want Atraxa / another big bomb or whatever, and then cards that put cards in your graveyard. So here you've got Alter, so that's a turn 2 elemental, plus you're going down cards to evoke them, or Underworld Cookbook to discard, as opposed to just having Faithful Mending / the one that's in Dimir colors that basically does the same thing. By the way, he says, thank you for the insight. Yeah, well, I'm glad that he appreciates the insight. Yeah, so the issue is, to recap, the issue is that you're just jumping through more hoops to do something that is like, okay, yes, technically, if you have Alter plus Kroxa, you do actually just straight up win the game, as opposed to Goryosing in Atraxa where you might not win the game. But in almost all circumstances, Goryosing in Atraxa is basically going to win you the game. And by not playing Ephemerate and all the other value stuff that the traditional list plays, you're missing out on all of those plays and then gaining this clunkier version of the Goryo plan. I also don't know how good Beseech the Mirror even is in this list. There's not too many things to sack to it, and it's only finding you one half of a piece and not the other half. Like, you really need ways of discarding stuff out of your hand when you draw like the Kroxas or Atraxas in your hand. You need ways of discarding them. And right now you only have 2 cookbooks, and then you're just hoping to randomly mill stuff with Alter. You really need to be playing like looting spells. Is that true in the One Ring meta? Yeah, it is. Yes, the One Ring will prevent you from slamming them with Atraxa or whatever, but it will not, for one thing, it will not prevent you from annihilating them with Emrakul. If your opponent rings and then you just Emrakul, it's like, okay, they don't take any damage, but they still sack their entire board. Or like you're just getting Atraxa and then just having a bunch of spells anyway. And the Ephemerate plan also lets you be pseudo scam with Grief and whatnot. So yeah, just play traditional Goryos. Then we have a list from one of our chat members, Bruh Moment Lamau. So let's see, what format is this for? Pioneer, it's Golgari Stompy. So let's see. So, okay, we've got 4 mana elves plus Deathrite Shaman. Then we've got Rotting Register and Shakedown Heavy, Archfiend of the Dross Shieldred, Arena, Fatal Push, Tamio's Safekeeping, Liliana, Thoughtseize, 16 lands, and a bunch of those lands. So there's Deathcap Blade, 2 Besagus, Evolving Wilds, Fabled Passage, and then sideboard is 8 cards, Undying Malice and Damping Sphere. So I guess you haven't worked out what cards these should be yet. Okay, so the green is only in here to be mono ramp, right? That's the only purpose for the green spells, so that you can just get to these cards first, or like faster. All right, there's some problems. Playing these fetch lands, these lands are awful. Your deck wants to go turn 1 Mana Dork, turn 2 3-drop, turn 3 4-drop. And these fetch lands that are coming in tapped are preventing you from doing that. Yeah, you need them for Deathrite Shaman. So the actual answer here is to just not play Deathrite Shaman, because Deathrite Shaman's not good in Pioneer. You don't have access to regular fetch lands, therefore Deathrite Shaman's not good. So cut the Deathrite Shamans, play the regular 8 mana elves, cut the fetch lands, you need basically all of your lands on turn 1 to be untapped green sources so that you can play elf turn 1 into more of this stuff. Secondly, you don't need Tamiyo Safekeeping in this list. If you have this many, you need Tamiyo Safekeeping in a list where you really, really need your threats to survive. And that means that you are relying on specifically either one combo piece like a Rona, or you're relying on very few bombs. And this list has 12 bombs. Like, that's plenty. So you don't need safekeeping. Let's see, what's beyond that? And then the problem is with these 3-drops here, they're just actually not good enough. So Rotting Regisaur making you discard is a significant drawback and is only good if you either, one, have a way to where the drawback doesn't matter. So like you empty your hand so fast that you're never going to discard anyway because you're just going to play all your spells every turn. Or somehow discarding the card is beneficial, like you have some kind of graveyard synergy where putting the card in the graveyard matters. If you're actually just discarding a card to this every turn, that's bad. It's especially bad if your opponent has a way to remove this at instant speed, which albeit in Pioneer is not nearly as easy, but there are still ways to do it. So you go Rotting Regisaur and your opponent goes past to you, you discard and then they kill it. Is terrible. Shakedown Heavy is also a card that doesn't see much play because the problem is you can just never guarantee that you're actually going to hit your opponent with it. Like, yes, they do give you a card if they choose to tap it down, but that's the problem. Like, they can just choose to give you a card or choose not to. So if they, like, it's one of those old Punisher cards where if they're in a position where either they don't care about taking the damage or they just have sufficient blockers to block it or they have a removal spell, then they'll just let you attack. And if they don't, then they'll just tap it. So it never actually does what you want. If you want to draw more cards, they don't have to let you draw more cards. And if you want to hit them, they can tap it down and draw a card instead of hitting them. And then Liliana the Veil is, again, it's in a similar spot as Regisaur, where Liliana the Veil you really want in a deck where you can empty your hand super fast or where you have more removal spells. And right now you have 4 Fatal Pushes and that's it. And then Archfiend, Shieldred, I mean, that's fine. Like, these are probably the best 2 like black bombs for their value. I don't know if you've said anything, but what do you want the ban announcement to be? Personally, I want Greasefang and Storm the Festival gone. I'd be okay with Karn going, only if Greasefang goes too. I've said it before. What I want gone from Pioneer is Nykthos / Karn, but preferably Karn, Mayhem Devil, Treasure Cruise Dig Through Time, Curious Obsession, Fable the Mirror Breaker. Is that all the main decks? Lotus Field, Greasefang. Yeah, those are the ones I'd like to see gone. Why Mayhem Devil? It's a horrible, horrible play pattern card. It completely invalidates X1 creatures, and it has the same timing window problem as Yawgmoth, where there's no window in which you can meaningfully interact with it. The moment Mayhem Devil hits the field, you can't kill it and then be okay. You go, oh, I kill your Mayhem Devil. I go, in response, sack like 5 things, kill your whole board, or deal a bunch to you. It doesn't matter that you removed it. Ban Nykthos and Beseiju. Oh yeah, Beseiju should also be banned. Yeah, so cut Deathrite, cut the fetch lands, play more untapped green sources on turn 1, play the full 8 mana elves, and then you need to figure out better like stompy creatures than these guys, or figure out a way to make their downsides not downsides. Arena, I'm also not really sure about. Like, this could take some work to make better. You probably need more removal spells rather than Tamiyo Safekeeping. And then obviously you need to figure out your sideboard. All right, so that is that deck. Thank you for the submission. And then we have this deck. I believe this is a submission from gingerbreadman in the chat. And they say, feedback on a Pioneer deck of mine. It's nothing special, but I hope I can make it into a tier 2, but I don't know how. Okay, so I got into my locals the other day, but do you think Greasefang and Winota are the same play pattern? Basically, yeah. Greasefang hits the field. Do you have instant speed removal? If not, you lose. It's arguably even worse because it comes out on turn 3. Although Winota played Mana Dorks that got it out on turn 3 too, so kind of the same thing. All right, so this is what looks like a blue-black control deck. So Pioneer, blue-black control. let's see, pretty stock blue-black mono base. Then there's Thoughtseize, Sleight of Hand, Consider, Fatal Push, Censor, Drown in the Lock, Go for the Throat, Metamorphic Alteration. So we're running the Drossfiend plan. Then Negate, Meat Hook Massacre, Narset, Quick Study, Witch's Vengeance, Farsight Ritual. Look at the top 4 of your library. If the spell was bargained, look at the top 8. Put 2 of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom. Extinction Event, draw Shark Typhoon, Torrential Gearhulk, Dig Through Time. Okay. And then a bunch of various like blue-black control cards in the sideboard, plus a bunch of like considerations over here on the side as well, like things you might play. Okay. Okay, so a couple of things. You need to figure out, first of all, what you're trying to do. It's too all over the place. You've got control elements, but then you also have Dross plus Metamorphic Alteration, but then you also have Torrential Gearhulk, but you only have 1 Gearhulk instead of the full 4, or like just more than 1 copy. You've got Dig Through Time, but there's nothing that you're specifically trying to find outside of the combo here, although it's an instant, so Gearhulk gets it, but you only have 1 Gearhulk anyway. You've got Narset, but you don't actually have like Days Undoing or any of the things that are super combos with it, so it's just a value piece, but even then you're not doing great. And then you've got like 2 Censor, 1 Negate, and then 1 Drown. Like this just doesn't make sense. You need to be more like, why are there not 4 Drowns, for example? Why is there only 1 Drown? So it just feels like you're kind of all over the place and don't exactly know what you're trying to do with the deck. Quick Study's not good, cut that. Neither is this card. Witch's Vengeance is not main deckable. There's too many decks where that's not going to work. Just sideboard that. Like Extinction Event is more main deckable because it actually kills big creatures. The next thing is I've played the Drossfiend, the Metamorphic Alteration Archfiend combo before, and this combo is just not a good combo. It's too unreliable, and usually if you have a Dross in play for multiple turns anyway, or even just 1 turn, you're usually just winning by beating your opponent to death with this guy to begin with, and you don't need the Metamorphic Alteration. And then when you have the Metamorphic Alteration and you don't have an Archfiend, oh boy, it's such a worthless card. And you only have 3 of each. Like, if you're gonna do the combo, you need 4 of each. What else? Again, like, you're running Torrential Gearhulk, but then 2 of your cantrips are Sleight of Hand instead of Opt, meaning the Gearhulk can't hit them. Like, way too all over the place. Pick a lane and go with it. Is this a control deck? Is it a combo deck that's trying to kill with Archfiend? What are you trying to do? Figure that out, go with that. You only have 1 Shipwreck Marsh, like, there should be more of that. Fabled Passage is kind of blech. I don't really like it. Drowned Catacomb, if you look at this, how many actual islands and swamps do you have in your deck? You've got 4 Watery Grave, 1 swamp, and then 3 islands. And then and then Fabled Passage, I guess, kind of. But there's going to be way too many times when this is coming in tapped. That's also why I don't like Fabled Passage, because there's too many times when it's coming in tapped. Just because you're a control deck that's trying to go to the late game doesn't mean that you don't also need to be doing things early. So I just don't like Fabled Passage at all. The only time Fabled Passage is good is when you're playing some kind of synergy that makes it good, like Omnath, but even then it's extremely dubious. And then what else? The rest of the mana is probably fine after that. There's never a reason to only be playing 2 Thoughtseizes. Again, you're either playing 4 Thoughtseizes or you're not playing Thoughtseize. Yeah, like when I look at this deck, it feels like you just don't know what you want your deck to do. Then the other thing is there are better Gearhulk decks in Pioneer, and specifically the transmog decks that transmog into the transmog decks / creativity decks that either hit Gearhulk or hit Atraxa are just better than what you're trying to do here. They have way bigger payoffs. So those decks will run Mirex and Flip the Switch and other cards that put tokens into play, and then they'll just transmog or creativity their tokens, and then they'll play like Magma Opus and whatnot, and then they'll either just have Gearhulk to put a ton of value into play, or they'll actually have just straight up Atraxa, which is a far better payoff than anything you're doing here. Yeah, those are stuff useful in blue-black I just dropped there to consider. I made an in-between with everything that truly focuses on nothing reliably. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, you need to pick... And then even a lot of the cards where you're not even picking stuff, it's like, why is there a negate in here? Or like Censor, or instead of just the 4 Drowns, like why is there only 1 copy of Go for the Throat? Why are there 3 different sweepers? Like Witch's Vengeance plus Meat Hook plus Extinction Event, and there's 1 of each one. Identify which one is either the most reliably good, like between various different matchups, where like, okay, this one is good in all these different matchups, whereas like Witch's Vengeance is only good against specifically like low to the ground, go wide aggro decks. Same thing with Meat Hook, whereas Extinction Event is also good against like mono green, but not maybe as good against the aggro decks. So figure out like which one hits more things, or you can identify, well, this deck struggles against deck X, and therefore I want the sweeper that is the best one against that deck, but not 1/1/1. Like, that doesn't really make any sense. And then also, you don't have enough removal spells to protect Narset. You've got 4 push, 1 go for the throat, maybe Drown in the Locks of removal spell. So that's 6. So that's 6 removal spells that you can play before Narset comes down on turn 3. That's not enough. Unless you count the counter spells, but that's also kind of dubious. So the first thing I would say is it's just a straight up worse version of the blue-red Gear Hulk decks. But if you're still inclined to play blue-black for some reason, then you need to fix up all of these numbers. So probably more Gear Hulks, no Drossfiend combo. If you're going to play a 4-mana black creature, it should be Sheoldred. And then shave all these bad cards like Quick Study, Farsight Ritual, Witch's Oven, Meat Hook. Pick the better counter spells, like just run the 4 Drowns, the 4 Thought Seizes, and have a more reliable blue-black control deck. Get rid of Fabled Passage and probably Drowned Catacomb, although maybe you could still play some copies, but probably not. Probably not, actually. And then more Shipwreck Marshes. And so that is the breakdown of that. I was messing around with stuff and got fixated on this. I enjoy your MTG puzzles vid and hope you make another one like that. As a judge, it was a good brain teaser vid and I even learned new things. That one, I made too many mistakes in it. Like, I knew I wasn't going to get everything right because they were so complicated. I even recorded a puzzle that didn't get into the video because I recorded it and then I kept thinking like, actually, I don't know if that's correct. And I had to cut it and replace it with a different one. I would like to do another one, but it's hard finding interesting interactions. I have 7 right now that I didn't include that I could make into a new one, but I would want at least 10 on the next one, if not more than that. So it'll come around when I figure out enough interesting situations. But I think I covered a lot of the rules in the first one. Like, the main ones are going to be like, there's going to be priority, specific mechanics, layers, timestamps, targeting, like, you know, steps to casting a spell. I think I covered like most of it in the first video, but I would like to do a sequel. But anyways, I believe that is all the viewer brews. So if you submitted a brew, thank you very much. And I hope that whatever analysis I gave your brew was insightful and that you enjoyed it. And that will be the end of that. I do not think I will actually be playing any of these on stream, but it was interesting to go over them regardless. And if you joined the stream today, I hope you also enjoyed it. And if you're watching this on YouTube, same. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and we will see you next time.